Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Wednesday, November 20th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Jon Elmer, Asa Winstanley, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 411 of Israel's genocide in Gaza as the war on Lebanon expands. Coming up, we'll have a discussion with Kaleem, Hawa, and Nas Abdelal from the Palestinian Youth Movement about the Mask Off Maersk campaign, which aims to pressure the shipping company to end its complicity in the Israeli genocide. Asa will have an update on the Israeli rampage in Amsterdam as the New York Times was revealed to have killed a visual investigation that would have debunked claims that violence in Amsterdam earlier this month was characterized by so-called anti-Semitic attacks on Israeli football fans. And later on in the program, Jon will cover all the latest from the battles in northern Gaza and southern Lebanon. But before we go to the news, we're joined by our contributor, Abubaker Abed, live from central Gaza. Abubaker, are you there?
Hello?
Hello. Hi.
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, perfect.
Hi, Abubaker.
Yeah.
It's so good to see you, Abubaker.
We
Thank you
missed you.
so much. I did too. It's just, I'm just honored again to be here because I think, I don't know, but it's a very, very positive feeling that can't be described. So I'm really pleased to be back again.
We share the same feeling. Abubaker, tell us about the current situation in central Gaza. What have you been reporting on? What have you been? What is your daily life like these days? I know that you've been posting a lot about the access to food, the meager amounts of flour that you and your family and your neighbors and community have been able to bake with, but it's substandard to say the least in quality. How are people living right now in Gaza?
Yes, because I've repeated that many times before, but look, I'm saying it again. It's absolutely hellish, nightmarish what people are going through here. There's no way to cope with the current situation. And if we talk about the bombings, this has been repeated. This has been the norm because, like, I was at the hospital just an hour ago, and just 3 people were transferred from an attack on a school in Al-Aqsa refugee camp to the Al-Aqsa hospital, and that included one child. And you could see just people wailing over the bodies of their loved ones, mothers crying in pain after losing their entire families, and children are left alone just because they have become orphaned. Because as far as I'm concerned, there has been a new stat stated by the Gaza Health Ministry that there are more than 3,000 newly orphaned children since the outbreak of the war. And people have been asking about them. How do this category of children is spending their life under the current war? So they don't have anything to left alone on the streets. Organizations cannot deal with them. So it's a very miserable situation. And if we talk about the famine, there is nothing like that has changed, unfortunately, since last time I talked to you. Because, like, what I've been hearing and on a personal level, which is, of course, the same, is that people here say, like, I heard about, I posted something on Twitter yesterday that my neighbor's child who's died next to me keeps screaming in pain and in hunger for his mother during the late hours of the night, and he keeps asking her for food and to feed him in any way, and she just keeps saying that, okay, I will tomorrow bring you, and it keeps going like this without any. And when the next day comes, and he reminds her mother that you said you would feed me, but then she didn't have anything. So it's a very it's incredibly harsh, especially when it comes to other people. Like I've been walking through, like in the streets now today, and some women, mothers, they were speaking to each other that we didn't have any bite of food. We haven't had any bite of food since yesterday's night. So spending 24 hours without a bite of food is cannot be really described in any words. And even because we've been talking about the looting of aid and the hijacking that has been happening, I saw Dr. Ali posting about that, and yes, you can see. And then from where do these people can get food, can access food, can access medicine or other medical or other supplies? I mean, there is nothing I can really say, because yeah, that's it. Just like bug-infested flour, and this bug-infested flour is now very expensive. So that doesn't mean it is bug-infested, it's not expensive, or it is it's overpriced. No, if you want just a handful of this flour, of this bug-infested flour, you need to pay at least $10. At least for just a handful that is less than half a kilogram. And if you want to buy there have been some sorts of vegetables that have been allowed to enter the strip, but if you want to buy like one onion or one eggplant, you need to pay $4 for one, only one. So, and if you want the rotten vegetables or the of course, there are no fruits, there's no meat, there is no fish, there is no, there are no, all these other things are not available. I mean, but this particular type of vegetables, like they are rotten food, they are rotten vegetables, and they are very, very overpriced, and you need to pay unimaginable sums just to afford to get one onion, one eggplant, and this is the situation. So people don't have anything, even aid. It doesn't make any sense.
Abubaker, talk to us about aid. From what you see and what your neighbors see, what you see in your community, are there any organized aid efforts present? And I include in that UNRWA or other organizations. Is anything reaching people?
No, at all, because I've just talked about to you about that those mothers were talking about, like, there has been no aid reaching us. There is no aid. There is even no canned food. I swear we haven't eaten anything since yesterday's night, etc., etc. So people don't receive aid. Like my family, my neighbors, all the same thing. Because when I talked to you last time and I said that I spent many hours in the night sitting with myself thinking about whether I was in another country or something, that I would have everything. I really meant it. Because we didn't have, and we still don't have anything just to eat and just to resist to live. Because even if you have all types of food, Dr. Ali, because we want to remind people that our aim is not to aid in the end. We need an end to this war. So even if we have all types of food, Dr. Ali, I'm going to ask you a question. Is it really good, or is it really enjoyable to eat the most favorite bite of food ever while you are under constant Israeli bombings? No, of course no. So it's a very complex feeling. It's a feeling that no one can describe, and people are still being subjected to sheer violence, to sheer brutality every single day. I can't sleep the nights, to be honest. People just get up and sleep. Their stomachs are empty or completely empty. They only had, some loaves of bread, and now one loaf of bread costs $1. One loaf of bread again costs $1. So how can people really cope with this situation? If we talk about the humanitarian organizations, I said it back in April with you, Dr. Ali and Nora, and I'm saying it again, that those humanitarian organizations are not operating well on the ground, and they are responsible for the starvation, the forced starvation that is spreading all across Gaza, because they're not sincere with their work, and there is a lot of manipulation in their work when it comes to distributing aid, etc. And let me tell you something, that some of the gangs have direct cooperation and direct coordination with some members of the humanitarian organizations that are working on the ground in terms of looting aid and hijacking aid trucks and lorries. And I've been aware of that. I've been speaking to people from UNRWA and other humanitarian organizations, and they have really told me that some of our members are behind all that is happening right now across Gaza. So you can see that we are just pressed in every aspect by all people. We are facing we're facing death from every single direction.
I want to focus on this issue of aid for a moment, Abubaker, because the the Washington Post reported yesterday that on Monday, that as Gaza's hunger crisis worsens, organized gangs are stealing much of the aid Israel allows into the enclave, operating freely in areas controlled by the Israeli military, according to aid group officials, humanitarian workers, transport companies, and witnesses. So it does appear, and there's other reporting on this, that Israel is allowing a little bit of aid in, but also making sure that it gets stolen and looted so that it doesn't reach people. So on the one hand, they can say, yes, look, we allowed some aid in, but on the other hand, they allow and promote chaos and organized gangs and lawlessness in order to prevent the aid from
which aid, Dr. Ali? I'm sorry to cut you off. Which aid are we talking about? I'm sorry.
I'm just telling you
I agree with that, but I told you one time, Dr. Ali, and I'm repeating it once again.
Yeah.
I swear that is something I dealt with just 1 week ago, that we got some milk through someone from one of the aid boxes. I think we bought that even. We made 1 cup of milk and we presented that to a cat in the street, and this cat didn't like it and didn't drink it. What aid are we talking about? What aid that we are talking about? Look, we are simply dehumanized in every single thing that is transpiring all across the BCH territory, Dr. Ali. Look, I don't want aid. Simple as that. If you want to really dispatch some of the worst quality food that you are really giving up in your country, in your home country. So do not pretend to be a very good human and just I'm sending aid, I'm etc. I'm trying to help Palestinians, etc., etc. All this nonsense. Because come to people here this is non-eatable. This absolutely tastes bad, very bad. So what is it like when you have some of the food, for example, some cheese that is brought in and then it's completely rotten? What would you do? So who's responsible for all that? And if this is something, because you talked about those criminal gangs, and those gangs are fully supported by the Israeli regime, by the Israeli army.
Yeah.
And all of what they do is just, to take all money and prevent thousands of families from very important aid. My neighbor has been asking many organizations about any sort of help because his wife is going to give birth in the next 2 days. Okay, no one has even looked at him. No one looked at him. No one has even given a hand out to him. And this is the same for my neighbor as a child. Where it is going, because this is the war. I said it one time, and I don't know where I said it, but I probably haven't said it before. But I'm going to tell you from here, I'm responsible for what I'm saying, that some spies are sent through the humanitarian convoys into Gaza. Okay? And we've seen that on the ground. So where is the humanity or the humanitarian task or job that these organizations are doing when they do all of this fuss and create this chaos, as you said, all among these people? I don't know.
Abubaker, you make a very important point, which is that, and this has always been the case for many, many years, since before you were born, of trying to reduce the Palestinian cause to simply a charitable issue, that people need more food. Of course, people need food and they have the right to food, but that's not the Palestinian cause. Rather, the deliberate starvation by Israel is one of the deliberate tactics, the atrocities that Israel is using with its accomplices in Washington and Brussels and some regional capitals, unfortunately, to try to starve the Palestinian people into submission. Abubaker, while we have you, I want to turn to a subject that at the same time is part of this tragedy, but I know one that is close to your heart. You wrote a very special article for the Electronic Intifada that we published this week that we'll put up now. And you spoke to, for this article, you spoke to Sam Morsi, who plays for Ipswich Town, one of the Premier League teams in the UK. I learned this from you, Abubaker, because I don't follow sports very well. But tell us about this article. Tell us what Sam Morsi said, and tell us about some of the football players that you profile in this article.
Yes, the first thing that I have to say that this is by far the best article I've ever done in my life, not only during this war. It means the word to me. It has landed in the best place. It has, been produced and formulated by the words of the most privileged and, distinguished people on earth. And for this article, the importance of this is that after 1 month, the bloodiest month ever for sports in Gaza, where more than 60 athletes were killed during the past month, and just like in the past 2 days, 2 players have been killed, a goalkeeper and a winger for Khadamat Rafah and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 club in Gaza. So the continued attacking, killing of players all across Gaza is absolutely an untold tragedy. And this has to be covered and told to people around. It's a part of the problem. It's a part of the genocide. And when you find players, because Sam Morsi is the only vocal and outspoken player that has been talking about Palestine very clearly and very explicitly on his social media accounts and even during games. I remember one time he was like last season when he was in the championship, and he just interrupted the interview and switched the conversation and said that we are playing right now and having a really good life, enjoying football while the plight continues in Palestine. When you have these people in different aspects of life, in different sectors of life, that they are defending you, that they are behind you, then you feel that you are not alone. It gives you hope. And I said to you that in the end, our hope will not be dashed at all. We're going to give hope. We're going to see hope and breathe hope every time. We are very hopeful people. But when you see that these players in particular are behind you and they are trying to support you in every form and in every means, then you feel the privilege that these especially those players are behind you. When no one like them is talking, no player in the Premier League ever has spoken a word on Palestine. So he is really the only one, the only player, and he's a captain, so he's a very, very important player. He's the captain of the team. He's the only one that has spoken in Palestine, the only one. So this player will be a part of all this liberation that is going to come. And he's very much connected. And by the way, he talks to me like sometimes, and he tries to learn the better of me. So I don't know, this means the word to me because, I'm in the end, I'm not a war correspondent. I'm a football journalist, but I'm obliged to do this sort of reporting right now. And I don't know, but everyone, even Nijum Sports, which is an organization that helps Muslim athletes all across the UK, and it has dealt with many players like Anwar Al-Ghazi, Asma Begovic, that they wanted to speak with me about this issue. They are having a message and trying to convey the message that whatever it costs, because if you don't know, raising any political messages in UK stadiums is banned, and a heavy fine will follow if someone does that. But what I know is that Sam Morsi doesn't care about that at all, doesn't care a whit about that, and he was very insistent. One of his friends told me that he was very insistent to show his support for Palestine, even if it meant or it means that he will lose his job and he will be fired from the club. So that can tell you how massive, how a legend of a player he is. And the same for the others, because we talked about another player. He's just a very young player, 18-year-old goalkeeper. He's trapped in Gaza. He's trying to maintain his fitness amid all these circumstances. So our players need hope. Our players need a chance because they deserve it in the end. But no one is looking, because this is the hypocrisy and the supremacy of FIFA and the footballing community all across Gaza. This is their hypocrisy. This is their, these are their values and their principles. So it's a very sad thing. But at the same time, when you have these people, they mean the world to you.
And it really does. I mean, I started following Sam Motsi and learning a bit more about him, and I can see that he talks about Gaza almost every day, and that's so important because sport is enormous. Sport is bigger than politics.
Absolutely.
And the sheer hypocrisy of FIFA and UEFA, the two major football federations, which continue to be complicit in this genocide, to allow Israel to play. We're going to talk more about this later in the program. Allow football hooligans, Israeli hooligans and thugs to travel across Europe and cause chaos and havoc, and expressing no solidarity and no support for the dozens of Palestinian footballers and other athletes who have been murdered in this genocide. And you are among the few journalists who has kept a spotlight on.
No, unfortunately, I'm sorry to cut you off. Mr. Ali. No, unfortunately, and I feel very sorry for that, but I'm the only one all across Palestine, not only Gaza. And I feel very, very hurt from inside. And then there are no journalists covering sports at all. And even when I talk to other journalists from around and everywhere, they didn't really care a whit about what I do, because this is, as you said, this is the sheer hypocrisy of the Western world in the end, and especially in terms of football. So what I do is the only thing I do, and the only one who does that, but I didn't know when it pays off. Unfortunately, FIFA is just ruled by Israel. That's what I can tell you.
Well, we're very grateful for it, Abubaker, and we're very proud that you wrote this story and we published it, because it lifts us all up. It raises our heads. We're very proud of the work you're doing. And I have learned a great deal from you. This is one of the pleasures of working with you, is I learn much more from you than I'm able to give you. And I know that's true for many of our viewers and readers as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just like before winding up this conversation, there is like some sort of, some message that I want to share. It's been 411 days. This is something no one can even imagine. I don't know what's next. It keeps getting worse all across Gaza. We're very hopeful people again, but just believe it or not, that we might be the next target, us, other people everywhere. But it simply needs your actions right now. Protesting no longer works. Divesting, boycotting, because the United States is printing money for Israel and giving Israel all the rights and it's made Israel cross all and exceed all the red lines. So I just want to say that it really needs your actions. People here, I can tell you that there are many hopeful people, if this is not the entirety of the strip. But believe me, it's been a lot. People here are just, cannot really understand what is going on and don't know what is next at all. Attacks continue, malnourishment and malnutrition and dehydration has just appeared again in Gaza's hospitals. That's what I've been seeing. And for me, I just want to say something, that 4 days later, I'm no longer 21, I'm 22. So I just want to say that I don't know what is next, but I don't want to keep celebrating my birthdays during all this, or amid this barbarity inflicted upon us. So it's just about, from here, I hope my call will not be turned down, but I just want to tell you that we need more activists like Lizzie Greenwood, this British activist that has gone on a hunger strike since November the 1st. We need more people like her all across the globe. And I'm calling you from here. I'm calling on every one of you from here to go on a global strike and to go on a hunger strike in solidarity with the people of Gaza. Other than that, I'm sorry to say it, but you are accepting the fact that this is still going on. And there is no way that this can really go on at all. Just believe me that people here are now beyond the breaking point. They are literally beyond the breaking point. So we want you to be with us. We see hope in you, but we're now at a time where, there's nothing. These are the most difficult times. I said it last time that this felt like a renewed version of the genocide, but these are the most difficult times we are going through. And never ever think about what is really going on, because this is what needs to be done. And I'm sending love and hope to every single one of you. I hope and I wish you all the best, and thank you so much for having me just one more time again.
Abubaker, everyone in the comments is sending their love and their gratitude and their happy birthday wishes to you. I think all we want for you and for everyone in Gaza is for everyone to be able to celebrate their birthdays, in a liberated Palestine. Again, we are just so proud of the work that you continue to do. I think we're all just we're always so moved, and we're always so worried about you. So please do come back. Please do come back and update us.
In the end, I'm just saying, like, in the end, when this war ends, because I've talked to many people around and everyone knows me, if you really want to show me real life, then after the war, you have the obligation to invite Abubaker to a plate of opera. So that's going to be your duty after this war, inshallah. All the best.
Absolutely.
All the best. Thank you. Thanks for the work you're doing, because it's as valuable as mine. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Abubaker. We love you. Take care.
Oh, I always, I don't know. I can't really articulate exactly what I want to say in the moment, because I'm so moved and so emotional when we see him. And, communicating with him, throughout the week is something that I'm really protective of. And also, every time I turn on my WhatsApp, I'm always very worried about him. So I'm glad we could have had him on today. That was really important.
Yeah, and please read and share his article. Abubaker always says it's gorgeous, and he always says that his dream is to be a football journalist and commentator, not a war correspondent.
Yeah.
I'm sure our birthday wish for him from all of us is that dream comes true as something very simple, and that everyone in Gaza and across Palestine gets to live the life they want and deserve and have the right to, instead of this just unspeakable, unbearable horror, this Holocaust, this genocide that we go to bed to and wake up to. And yet, every time we talk to Abubaker or to anyone else in Gaza, we're reminded that it's beyond anything that we who aren't there can understand, and we have to keep doing our utmost to fight it, to stop it, and not to give up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Ali. And coming up, we'll talk to organizers with the Mask Off Maersk campaign. But first, here's a brief summary of some of the latest developments in Gaza, the West Bank, and Lebanon. Israel's campaigns of systematic slaughter, destruction, and starvation in North Gaza is now in its 7th week, while airstrikes and massacres continue across all areas of the Gaza Strip. This video footage, filmed on Monday by Philippa Greer, a top legal official at the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, shows some of the extent of Israel's genocide and carnage in North Gaza. Greer states, quote, "Carts left behind loaded with belongings against the wreckage. The items that carry memories are long under the rubble. Horrific stories from northern Gaza of the sick and injured, the herding of men on their knees, considered lucky if they were wearing underwear when forced to strip and put on white PPE. Their fate cut off from the world, little boys walking down through the checkpoint south with their hands up, marching forward, a woman sitting alone, defeated with her possessions, submitting to the exhaustion, people forced away from bombardment and siege, arriving to more bombardment and siege. Another chapter of their painful journey begins, forced to flee towards civilians who are running away from naval gunfire. A little boy telling us that someone has been killed on the sand, forced toward no safety, no shelter, to hungry people running down sandy roads with empty pots, to the slow violence exposed through the stories of miscarriages and malnourished amputees unable to heal on bread alone. A series of airstrikes over the last week in Beit Lahia in North Gaza has killed hundreds of Palestinians as Israel bombed entire residential blocks and leveled multi-story apartment buildings. The Gaza government media office stated on November 17th that at least 4 separate massacres were carried out by Israeli soldiers, killing more than 70 Palestinians from 6 families in Beit Lahia. On Monday, November 18th, Israelis raided a house near the Kamal Adwan hospital in the city, killing at least 17 people. The hospital, which has been under relentless Israeli attacks since early October, was bombed again on Tuesday. The Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza stated that Israeli forces specifically targeted the hospital administration offices, quote, directly and without any reason, as the occupation opened heavy fire toward the hospital director's office, and the occupation also targeted the families of the medical staff at Kamal Adwan Hospital. 2 doctors in the hospital received their families completely exterminated. The occupation killed their wives and children in a crime that shames humanity. That attack on Kamal Adwan Hospital followed the targeting and destruction of the Al-Najjar Hospital in Rafah in the southern Gaza Strip, the health ministry added. Israeli forces reportedly sent in, quote, robots carrying tons of explosives and destroyed the only government hospital in the Rafah governorate. Quote, this hospital provided health and medical services to 300,000 people and provided health services during the genocide to 1.5 million displaced people and citizens before the invasion of Rafah. Also in Rafah this week, Israeli forces destroyed and set fire to the Badr Mosque. According to the Gaza government media office, 815 mosques have been completely destroyed by the Israelis. 151 mosques have been heavily damaged, and 3 churches have been destroyed. In central Gaza, Israel bombed residential buildings in Nuseirat and Burej refugee camps this week, bombing homes and killing dozens of people. In Gaza City, Israel bombed homes and schools that had been used as shelters for displaced families. 2 separate attacks on Gaza City schools took place this past week. Journalist Hossam Shabat documented the aftermath of an Israeli attack on the Salahuddin school, which incinerated people's belongings. Shabat also documented the attacks on the Abu Asi school a few days later, saying that, quote, no day passes without a massacre or an attack. In this area, we saw severed heads and bodies torn apart, their remains unidentifiable. Early this morning, Hossam Shabat was wounded in an Israeli airstrike in northern Gaza. He posted on Twitter or X, quote, after receiving news of a nearby bombing, I drove my car to offer assistance. When I arrived at the house full of terrified people, I heard their desperate screams from the second floor asking for help. The moment I entered, the house was bombed again, and the remains of the wounded were scattered around me. The rubble fell on me and my colleagues. One of the civil defense crews was killed, and while my colleague, photographer Mohammed Muhanna, and I were injured, many others did not survive. Just a few hours ago, Hossam Shabat stated that after a difficult night, he put his press vest back on again and returned to work. He said, quote, "We cannot sit back and relax while our people are being annihilated. In recent days, this shield has become like my shirt that I cannot take off." Euromed Human Rights Monitor issued a collection of eyewitness testimonies of field executions by the Israeli army in North Gaza. The group's field team documented the killing of a 58-year-old man and his 21-year-old son, shot inside their home in Beit Lahia in front of their family last week. A resident of Beit Lahia gave the following eyewitness testimony. On Wednesday, November 13th, quote, "Israeli occupation forces began advancing into the area where we were sheltering. We stayed trapped in the house, and less than 2 hours later, the forces blew open the door and stormed the building. I stayed upstairs with my family while my sister, Haifa, her husband Khalid, and their children remained on the ground floor. We heard gunfire but were too afraid to look and stayed huddled together in a single room upstairs. Within minutes, the soldiers entered and ordered us to evacuate quickly toward the eastern area near Beit Lahia Stadium and Abu Tamam School." The eyewitness continued, "When we descended to the ground floor, I found my brother-in-law Khalid laying dead with 2 gunshots to his abdomen, blood streaming from him. His eldest son, Ibrahim, had been shot in the head. I stood in shock for moments before a soldier threatened me to move or be shot. We were about 26 people in total. My sister Haifa was collapsed over her husband and son, begging to say goodbye to them, but the 12 soldiers present refused. We tried to pull her away as she kept saying they executed them in front of me. We rushed out of the house as a quadcopter drone hovered above us, with approximately 15 soldiers stationed around the house. My sister kept repeating, they executed them in front of me. On our way out, my sister recounted that as soon as the soldiers blew open the door and stormed in, they immediately shot her husband and son while they stood at the side of the room. They killed them without moving a muscle." The wife of the victim said, quote, "They ordered us to leave quickly. I tried to pull my husband and son, but they refused to let anyone near them, threatening us with guns to leave. This happened in front of the small children, 4 boys and 4 girls, who witnessed their father and brother executed before their eyes." Meanwhile, Euromed Human Rights Monitor reported that Israel has once again carried out a flower massacre in Gaza City. On November 13th, Israeli forces killed dozens of Palestinians who gathered to collect humanitarian aid northwest of Gaza City after approximately 50 days of Israel's complete prevention of all food, water, and medical aid to northern Gaza areas. Initial reports indicate that there were around 200 people gathered in the area at the time of the attack, 70 of whom were killed and injured. According to Euromed, quote, "Israeli army forces opened fire on dozens of Palestinian civilians waiting for aid trucks on the Sea Road northwest of Gaza City on November 13th at about 10 a.m. The Israeli forces killed and injured dozens of them when they attempted to seek refuge inside a nearby house and then bombed the building, destroying it. Many more individuals are now missing and presumably trapped beneath the debris. According to an eyewitness, the Israeli army targeted a group of civilians who had been enduring weeks of famine as a result of the occupation army blocking the entry of food and aid supplies into Gaza City and North Gaza. When they went to get flour, the army opened fire on them with shells and bullets, forcing them to take cover in a 2-story residential house nearby. As soon as they reached the building, the Israeli army bombed it. Screams from those still inside the targeted house were heard, but the victims' cries for help could not be answered as the area was inaccessible to ambulance and civil defense personnel. The United Nations reported on Monday that because of, quote, critical shortages of flour, all 8 UN-supported bakeries in Deir el-Balah and Khan Yunis have been operating at diminished capacity for weeks. 4 bakeries in central Gaza have already shut down. The remaining four will be forced to close within days without additional supplies. In related news, Gaza's Interior Ministry launched an operation to intervene against organized gangs inside Gaza who have been stealing food and looting humanitarian aid trucks. These gangs, who are longtime political rivals of the Hamas political party and its leadership, collaborate with and are protected by the Israeli army, which effectively allows and encourages the aid to be looted. On Monday, Gaza police this week killed at least 20 members of one of these gangs, 2 days after approximately 100 aid trucks were hijacked and looted after crossing into South Gaza. According to Drop Site News, quote, the trickle of goods that are allowed in are being increasingly targeted by armed criminal groups who either force truck convoys to pay exorbitant extortion fees or simply rob the aid. Much of this is facilitated by the Israeli military, who have systematically targeted Palestinian security forces charged with protecting the convoys, and then have allowed armed gunmen to attack aid convoys in areas under its control. Bassem Naim, a senior member of the Gaza government's political bureau, said, quote, these are groups of men from specific clans or families, mostly criminals who formed gangs to steal the humanitarian aid, either by taking armed control of trucks or imposing a fee, thousands of dollars for each truck. The stolen goods were sold again on the black market at very high prices. Usually the gangs operate meters away from the Israeli army, carrying different types of weapons and have all the communication equipment. Over the last 13 months of this genocide, Israel has routinely hunted, targeted, and killed members of the Gaza police and security forces who were providing protection for and coordinating the movements of the aid trucks to distribution warehouses. The Washington Post obtained an internal UN memo that stated that the gangs, quote, may be benefiting from a passive, if not active, benevolence or protection from the Israeli army. One gang leader, the memo said, established a military-like compound in an area restricted, controlled, and patrolled by the IDF. John will have a little bit more on this story later on in the broadcast. A journalist was killed in North Gaza this week. According to the Palestinian Wafa news agency, Mohammed Saleh al-Sharif was targeted and shot by an Israeli quadcopter drone in Jabalia refugee camp on November 16th. Wafa's sources reported that, quote, al-Sharif, who had recently been forced to evacuate his home in Tal al-Zatar area east of East Jabalia due to the ongoing Israeli bombardment, had sought refuge with a relative in nearby Beit Lahia. A few days later, al-Sharif and his cousin returned to their home to assess the damage, but as they approached, an Israeli drone targeted them. His cousin was killed instantly, and al-Sharif was left wounded, bleeding for more than 2 hours before succumbing to his injuries. Wafa noted that Israeli forces have prevented civil defense teams and ambulance services from operating in North Gaza for nearly 30 days. The family of Fadi al-Wahdi, a cameraman for Al Jazeera who was shot in the neck by an Israeli soldier in early October, has announced that they have begun a hunger strike to demand that Fadi be granted a permit for him to travel for critical medical treatment. Fadi has been in a coma for more than a month. Fadi's mother, who is reportedly struggling with cancer, is also joining the hunger strike. Nearly 190 journalists have been killed by Israel in Gaza since October 2023. We've published many features on the Electronic Intifada in the last week, but we wanted to highlight excerpts of this one by Raja Salah about siblings Najah and Luai, both farmers from Beit Lahia, who have established small but abundant plots of land after being forcibly displaced by Israel 4 times since October 2023. Raja writes, quote, before Israel's genocidal aggression started, the siblings farmed 55,000 square meters of land, divided mostly into a commercial strawberry operation and cucumbers, but which also produced potatoes, onions, and leafy vegetables. The love for greenery is ingrained in the siblings' blood, Luai said, as it is for many other residents of Beit Lahia. So it was an easy decision for Najah and Luai to begin to cultivate the land around their shelter, despite the many challenges and the relentless Israeli attacks that have claimed the lives of others who tried the same. Using seeds they'd brought with them from their own land, Najah and Luai planted radishes, wild garlic, Swiss chard, molokhia, beans, tomatoes, basil, mint, and thyme. Najah likes to recite a prayer whenever she lays down a seed, she said, asking God to feed us and the birds. Here I am today, eating and feeding those around me from my plants because the markets are empty due to the closure of the crossings, Najah said. They are fully aware of the destruction that has been wrought across Gaza, and that has been wrought on their own land in Beit Lahia, where they know from the few neighbors who have clung to life there that their land has been razed. But Najah said they refuse to abandon their connection to the land. When I sit in front of my plants, I feel a renewal of the spirit. I teach my children that life continues despite all the challenges we face. That's from Cultivating Hope in a Sea of Desolation by Raja Salah on electronicintifada.net. In the occupied West Bank this week, Israeli settlers attacked Palestinians in a Bedouin community near Duma, forcing 16 people, including 9 children, to be displaced after threatening to burn them alive, according to the UN. Dozens of Israeli settlers invaded the village of Beit Furik in the northern West Bank over the weekend. According to reports, the settlers burned homes and cars while Israeli soldiers blocked the roads and surrounded the village, standing by to protect the violent settlers. A resident of the village told Al Jazeera, quote, "They did not leave anything, the electricity pole and all our belongings, the sofas, the water tank, they did not leave a thing." A days-long Israeli raid into the city of Jenin and the Jenin refugee camp beginning on Monday has injured 9 Palestinians and caused significant damage to the city's infrastructure. According to the Wafa news agency, Israel used live ammunition and armed drones to shoot and injure people, while the Palestine Red Crescent Society reported that one of their medical teams was used as human shields by Israeli forces, which detained the team inside a home. Turning northwards toward Lebanon, the UN's Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reported that an Israeli airstrike hit central Beirut on Monday, following, quote, multiple strikes the previous day on the same area without prior warning, triggering new waves of displacement. Residents and displaced people who had sought refuge in the area were forced to flee once again. According to national authorities, at least 5 people were killed and dozens injured in the November 18th strike. Eastern and southern parts of Lebanon continue to be targeted, as well as Beirut's southern suburbs, resulting in more casualties and extensive damage to civilian infrastructure, the UN added. The Israeli airstrikes on Monday followed days of attacks on Beirut and villages in the south of Lebanon. On November 15th, Israel targeted the Civil Defense Center in Baalbek, killing at least a dozen paramedics and medical personnel, and launched airstrikes against the Beirut suburb of Goberi. At least 29 people were killed in Israeli attacks across Lebanon on Saturday alone, according to the health ministry. On Sunday, Israel bombed areas of Beirut, including a strike on the commercial district in Mar Elias, which killed at least 2 and wounded more than 20 others. Hezbollah's spokesman Mohammed Afif was targeted and assassinated in Beirut on Sunday as well. According to a correspondent for the Al Mayadeen news channel, the Israeli strike killed at least 5 people. Also on Sunday, Israel attacked the ancient city of Tyre, or Sur, killing at least 11 people and wounding nearly 50. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that even if there were a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hezbollah, Israel would still continue to bomb Lebanon, further rendering the word ceasefire utterly meaningless. Finally, as we always do, we wanted to share videos of people expressing defiance and resilience in the face of Israel's widening campaign of destruction. A community barber in the north of Gaza offered free haircuts to the local children in Al-Shati, or beach refugee camp, this week. And young musicians in Gaza who name themselves the Freedom Band played a classic Palestinian song together. And that's it for the news roundup. As always, go to electronicintifada.net for much more, especially to read our new features by our brave writers in Gaza. You're watching the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleague Ali Abunimah. Hi, Ali.
Hi again, Nora. Thank you for that. Nora, I have to say, watching that, even I, who I'm living and breathing this situation for, I find it hard to keep track of everything. And I'm really grateful to you because your roundup is so valuable to me. And I know it is to many of our viewers. So
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's my honor and my duty. And thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah. And so, Abubaker, when he spoke to us a little while ago, really emphasized the importance of people taking action and to continue to act in solidarity and to try to stop this genocide. And that's going to be the focus of our next discussion. And shall we go to that now, Nora?
Yeah, go ahead.
Great. Well, just as a reminder, you're watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Ali Abunimah here with my colleague, Nora Barrows-Friedman. And of course, Israel could not perpetrate its ongoing wars of extermination in Palestine and Lebanon and its attacks beyond whether it's in Iran or Yemen without a global supply chain to import weapons and other material needed by its genocidal army. One major link in this supply chain is the Denmark-based container shipping company Maersk. It's the world's second largest logistics firm by number of ships and by cargo capacity. And I'm sure that you've probably seen shipping containers with the Maersk name on them traveling on highways, freight trains, or in ports pretty much all over the world. From September 2023 to September 2024, Maersk has shipped significant quantities of military goods to the Israeli Ministry of Defense from the United States, a total of some 2,000 shipments. And these include hulls, engines, and specialized parts for armored personnel carriers and tactical vehicles, as well as parts for aircraft and artillery. Maersk's role in this deadly trade is documented in a research report authored by the Palestinian Youth Movement as part of the Mask Off Maersk campaign. And joining us now to talk about Maersk and the campaign to pressure the company to end its complicity in the Israeli genocide are Kaleem Hawa and Nas Abdel-Al. Both are organizers with the Palestinian Youth Movement, and Nas is also an information designer at Visualizing Palestine. Kaleem and Nas, we're delighted both of you could join us today on the Electronic Intifada live stream.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
It's good to have you.
Let's start by talking a bit about the report published recently by the Palestinian Youth Movement, laying out the evidence of Maersk's complicity in this genocide. It's a really meticulous and impressive piece of research, I have to say. So just can you kind of give us an overview of the key findings of the report in terms of the types of equipment that Maersk is shipping to Israel? And before you answer, I want to show you this picture from the report and ask you to tell us what it shows, just as a starting point.
Yes, thanks, Ali. What we have there in that photo is a Oshkosh long cargo medium tactical vehicle. Essentially, this image shows the Israeli occupation forces taking Palestinian men in Gaza, abducting them, blindfolding them, and stripping them, and carrying them in the beds of one of these Oshkosh tactical vehicles. These vehicles and the armored plates that go on them are shipped by Maersk, the shipping and logistics company, from the United States directly to the Israeli Ministry of Defense. And so this is just one example of the global supply chain that is sustaining this genocide. that our report hopes to articulate the research base behind, and therefore move also our people and those who are in solidarity with the Palestinian cause across the world into action.
And so just talk about some of the Oshkosh armored vehicle that comes from the United States. What are some of the other types of weapons shipped by Maersk that we know Israel is using in this current genocide?
Yes. So when we announced this campaign, we knew that Maersk was a large player in international and global supply chains for war, and that this is a historical role that they've taken up, that they have massive hundreds of millions of dollars and pound contracts with the US Department of Defense and with the UK Ministry of Defense to do this. And so we analyzed some of the import and export data shipping records, and were able to trace 2,000 shipments that had gone on Maersk ships to the Israeli Ministry of Defense. The types of military cargo that was carried on these shipments included helicopters and aircraft parts and fuselage. The bodies and engines and armored plates for the Namur armored personnel carriers, which are essentially light tanks. Bullet cores, 13,000 kilograms of bullet cores in one shipment alone. MK-80 projectile bodies, these are the massive projectiles that are being used in Gaza, in this case without the explosive material. A whole family of Oshkosh vehicles that have different uses. And importantly, 13 million pounds of armored plates. And these are used to repair and replenish the vehicles that the Israeli occupation forces are using in Gaza, because as we know, they are damaged by the resistance and in the process of implementing the genocide. And so Maersk is an essential player in sustaining and replenishing these military supplies that are being used there. We were also, I think it's important to state on the question of U.S. complicity, we were able to link many of these shipments to existing U.S. foreign military sales, which we know this year alone have totaled more than $6.8 billion, essentially of allocations from the United States to Israel to purchase these types of military cargo from the weapons manufacturers. So in the case of the Oshkosh vehicles, for example, this is part of a foreign military sale that the U.S. government has made, essentially allowing Israel to buy this. And Maersk is one step along the supply chain pathway that is supporting this.
It's astonishing, and this report that you published really lays it out so carefully and clearly. Let's talk about Spain's role in this weapons trade, because Spain is one of a tiny handful of U.S.-aligned countries that has announced that it is suspending any arms trade with Israel, including shipments through its territory. Earlier this month, Spanish authorities refused permission for a Maersk container ship to dock in the port of Al-Aqsa. I can't pronounce this.
Algeciras, yes.
The Spanish daily El País reported, citing Spanish government officials, that the ship, as well as another Maersk cargo ship due to dock later this month, would not be allowed to stop in Spain because their cargo includes weapons being delivered to Israel. Maersk denied that the cargoes contain, quote, military weapons or ammunition. But talk to us about the role that the Spanish port has been playing in Maersk's transportation of weapons to Israel. And what's your reaction to Spain's decision to block these ships? And if you think this is a serious effort, to block the arms trade, what kind of evidence that Maersk or Israel has been, did you find any evidence that Maersk or Israel has been trying to evade these kinds of restrictions and sanctions?
Yeah, I think we can maybe start to answer that question by looking at what Maersk has been saying in its own statements. So, when the campaign was first launched, Maersk released a statement saying that they, carried out human rights due diligence when operating in conflict zones, and they were applying standards and principles to ensure that they do not carry out any shipments of weapons or ammunitions to countries or areas currently involved in armed conflicts or that is subject to an arms embargo. So, this is what they were saying a couple months ago. And now, with the research that we've been able to compile through this report and also other, areas of research, we understand that this is, a complete fabrication. And we know that they are shipping weapons that are being used to commit war crimes in Gaza, and that, in fact, what Maersk does is indispensable to the Israeli war effort. And so there's a couple ways that you can kind of understand their denial. One is that they're, employing a very kind of legalistic and pedantic definition of what constitutes military weapons and ammunitions. So basically saying, we're not shipping completed bombs with explosives inside. We're just shipping, the holes, the parts of the bombs. We're not sending MK-84 2,000-pound bombs. We're just sending the shells that, 200 pounds of explosives are put into. And of course, the way we understand it, like, that's still a weapon. If you're sending armored personnel carriers, which are basically, they're the same make as a Merkava tank. They're just slightly different. They're sending these armored personnel carriers. They're sending the engines and transmissions that go inside them. And like Kaleem mentioned, most importantly, they're also supplying a tremendous amount of armored plates to repair these vehicles after they're damaged. So, we understand, like, at face value, they're transporting weapons, but also there are general legal principles in humanitarian law and the laws of armed conflict that prohibit aiding and abetting war crimes in various ways. So what Maersk is doing now is unlawful from that perspective, but it's also true from the perspective that we found that they are shipping arms against, even the EU and Spain's own regulations that they've put in place. And I think I can hand it over to Kaleem to talk a bit more about how that has, panned out with the Spain example.
Sure. Yeah. So the what we found basically is that these Maersk shipments follow established routes, and in almost all cases, the military cargo that was leaving from the United States, the port in New Jersey and in Houston, by the way, for the American viewers, these ships were traveling across the Atlantic, and they were all pretty much docking in Algeciras, Spain, where they would unload their cargo, and that cargo would then be picked up by another set of ships that are en route in the Mediterranean and deliver it to Haifa, directly to the Israeli Ministry of Defense. This is important, as was pointed out, because Spain is, I guess, officially on the record with a arms export law that references the EU's common military list, saying that this type of shipment of military cargo to Israel will not be allowed to dock in Spanish ports. And so when this research was released, and through the advocacy efforts of our movement and of the Progressive International, Spain released a statement that they would investigate the shipments, and a few days later identified that the research was in fact correct, that two Maersk container ships in the Atlantic were carrying military cargo headed to the Israeli Ministry of Defense, and they blocked those ships from docking. And so this is a positive development, certainly, but it's going to require maintaining pressure across the various Mediterranean ports and the movement groups that are active there to ensure that this is not a one-off situation. Now we move to the second sort of part of the story, which is because Spain has now enforced this element of their arms embargo, Maersk has adapted to this, and they've rerouted all their ships to Morocco, to the port of Tangier. So now these same ships that were traveling from the United States across the Atlantic have begun to dock in the port of Tangier Med in Morocco. And once again, Maersk ships are coming to pick up the cargo that is being offloaded there and bring it to Israel. As a result of this effort and the work that the pressure that the movements have been putting up, the people of Morocco have begun to push back against the government because of the ways that they're aiding and abetting the genocide. So we've seen mass protests in Tangier by the movement there, we saw several dock workers at the port refuse to unload this cargo, and some of them have resigned from the port operations. People have also been leaking photos of these tactical vehicles at the port, which has caused a great deal of embarrassment for the Moroccan regime, because they are being, I think it's just like highlighting the clear contradiction of these Arab regimes that are purchasing weapons from Israel, shipping consumer goods to Israel, and now we know also willing to allow military cargo to transit through their ports on their way to Israel. And so this is really significant, and there's a lot more to come. I think there's going to be a struggle with regards to Morocco's role in all of this. And the last thing I'll say on this is that we should not forget why these two ports in Spain and in Morocco are so integral to the campaign, which is that they are the two ports that have the greatest ability to allow for what's called transshipment. So basically the offloading of this cargo and allowing it to be picked up by others. So from Maersk's perspective, as a multinational corporation, their access to European markets and their access to the Mediterranean depends on these two ports. Because the container ships that travel across the Atlantic, they drop off the cargo and they continue down the Horn of Africa. So if both Spain and Morocco implement some form of arms embargo, using basically this military cargo as the pressure point, then we believe Maersk, as a multinational corporation, will cease transporting this cargo because they don't want to risk their overall bottom line in Europe and the Mediterranean.
This is really extraordinary work that this research was able to spur the Spanish government to act on this. And it's an important point that you make, that this needs to be sustained action and not just a one-off. But this is all very promising. And what's striking to me, the details you're giving us, I believe these developments happened since the report was published just a few weeks ago. But even in the report itself, we see sort of the extent to which the web of complicity and genocide really is global. And just one example that stuck out to me is that the engines for the Namer and the Namer armored personnel carriers and the Merkava tanks, and also the Eitan armored personnel carriers that Israel uses in this genocide, are made by a company called MTU America at a plant in South Carolina. And MTU America is a subsidiary of Rolls-Royce Solutions America, which is the subsidiary of the British company. I believe, is it Kaleem and Naz, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the Aero Engines company, not the car maker.
That's right.
Yeah, because Rolls-Royce, there are two separate companies.
Engines.
Yeah, there's one that makes aircraft engines and military engines, and then there's the famous luxury cars. These are now separate companies. I don't think too many of our viewers are buying Rolls-Royce cars that we need to worry about calling for a boycott, but it is not that Rolls-Royce, even though it's the same name. And of course, Rolls-Royce is based in Derby in England. And so when we hear Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, adamantly denying this genocide and refusing to stop British support, it's because there's money being made out of murdering Palestinian people and Lebanese people, and so that's just really stands out in the report. What I want to do though is you talked about Maersk potentially stopping its shipping of military cargoes. That hasn't happened yet. But in May, Maersk announced that due to the ongoing operations by Yemeni armed forces to enforce Yemen's blockade on shipping to Israel until the genocide and the siege end, Maersk announced that the company would be rerouting all its vessels around the Cape of Good Hope for the foreseeable future. That means, of course, taking ships around the southern point of Africa in order to get from Asia to Europe instead of taking the much shorter route through the Suez Canal. Maersk added that this adds considerable time, cost, and complication to its shipping logistics. And just a few weeks ago, at the end of October, Maersk said its ships would not be returning to the Red Sea anytime soon. CEO Vincent Clerc told journalists, quote, "There are no signs of de-escalation and it is not safe for our vessels or personnel to go there." So Maersk is continuing to ship weapons to Israel, effectively aiding and abetting genocide while incurring significant additional costs and complications to its operations. By contrast, following the start of the Russian military operation in Ukraine in February of 2022, Maersk announced that it was ending all its operations in Russia, and it even took a decision to divest completely from any business and assets in Russia, and that went far beyond the requirements of sanctions imposed by the EU. What do you think accounts for the company's different approaches to these two situations? And what do you think it will take for Maersk to actually stop aiding and abetting this genocide in Palestine and now Lebanon?
Right. It's a good question. I find this sort of tendency to try and highlight the contradiction or the hypocrisy, let's say, of these types of companies with the Russia and Ukraine example that was given, and Israel, to be sort of a liberal reflex, because ultimately Maersk is being consistent. Maersk is an arm of U.S. imperialism. They have long-standing contracts with the U.S. Department of Defense, something called the Maritime Security Program, which allows the Department of Defense to use Maersk ships to ship military cargo and weapons to U.S. bases across the world. And they also, for the British viewers on the show, they have a similar contract with the UK Defence Ministry called the Airlift Services Framework. It's 130 million pounds. And so to provide logistics and transportation services. And so you have to understand Maersk is deeply imbricated in the imperial project, and they will follow the dominant ideology and preferences of said imperial project. So they are being fully consistent and in line with their interests here. And as you mentioned, Ali, this is it is big business to support and sustain the unbearable mass murder and torture and collective punishment of the Palestinian people in Gaza. We know this. The U.S. government is conducting this genocide. It is its weapons in some cases. It is certainly its manufacturers. It's its logistics companies flying U.S. Flags on their ships. It's American intelligence, and it's even American mercenaries. So we have to understand that when they say, they're talking about a humanitarian support for Gaza, or like trying to negotiate a ceasefire, they're talking out of the corner of their mouth. And the same is true for Maersk. We're not holding out hope that they're going to stop supporting Israel with military cargo, out of moral pressure. What we are proposing is a people's arms embargo. We're proposing to make them stop shipping military cargo to the Israeli military. And I think that is an important political intervention for us to make as a movement. I was thinking about Abubaker's comments earlier on boycott and how, the nature of boycott and whether it can stand up to the needs of this moment, so to speak. I think part of why PYM is pursuing this campaign against Maersk is because we also want to make an intervention into the nature of financialized capitalism right now and where our movement needs to head, not just focusing on individual consumer boycotts, but what it might look like to take up a collective action to put pressure across multiple different domains on a company like Maersk and others that support with the provision of weapons of mass death to Israel.
Yeah.
Well, talk a little bit more about that. How is the Palestinian youth movement, mobilizing people, and maybe talk a little bit more about the role of organized labor. In recent years, during this genocide, 10 years ago, I was at the port of Oakland, with the Block the Boat movement, which had another action. A few years ago as well. The Israeli Zim shipping company now will never dock again at the Oakland port, and that's because of the organized labor movement, the International Longshore Workers Union here on the West Coast, and community organizations working together. Can you talk about how activists are engaging with organized labor as part of this campaign for, as you said, Kaleem, a people's blockade?
Yeah, so I think, a lot of the political and economic incentives that Kaleem laid up helps us to understand why Maersk is acting as a leading partner in this genocide. And I just wanted to take a moment to also, highlight the fact that what we released with this research report is only a fraction of the research that we're working on to understand the full extent of Maersk's complicity in this genocide. So that report focuses specifically on, commercial shipments, so things that are going on commercial vessels from U.S. ports to the Israeli Ministry of Defense and stopping over in the Mediterranean. There's also, as Kaleem mentioned, direct defense transfers that are coming directly from the U.S. Department of Defense and that are coordinated by the Defense Logistics Agency of the U.S. Now, those shipments are much harder to get data on because of the national security nature of the specialized ships within the Maritime Security Program. But we do know that Maersk is the largest shipper within that Department of Defense program. So that is another area of research that we're exploring. Another aspect of research, and one that hopefully our next report will be focusing on, is the way that Maersk is responsible in many cases for shipping weapons components from manufacturers all over the world to the United States, where they're then assembled into completed weapons. So, for example, we'll be looking at F-35 aircraft wing parts, which are produced by Leonardo, which is an arms manufacturer in Italy, and Israel Aerospace Systems, which of course is an Israeli arms manufacturer and is also the arms manufacturer from which Morocco earlier this year signed a $1 billion deal to purchase a spy satellite from, which may provide some insight into how they've been, reacting to the recent developments at the port of Tanger Med. So I just wanted to give sort of a full picture of the scope of complicity. But because Maersk is involved in every aspect of the supply chain, it's bringing weapons from the US to Israel, it's bringing weapons components to the US where they're assembled into weapons. It also means that it's everywhere. It's trains, it's trucks, it's ships. It's a global corporation. It's everywhere in the world. That means opportunities for targeting it are also everywhere. So in terms of the logic of the campaign, like Kaleem said, we're not expecting to make a moral argument to Maersk, and convince them to stop, being a leading partner in this genocide. But the purpose of the campaign is to impose and introduce new costs, whether those costs are legal, reputational, financial, to put enough pressure on Maersk that, as a sort of globally integrated corporation, it tips the scales into, supporting this genocide, transferring arms to Israel is no longer a viable business option. So that was the sort of, strategic orientation of the campaign when it was launched in June. In September of this year, the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions put out a statement that asked labor unions to refuse to deal with military shipments to Israel and all military ships and logistics companies. And they highlighted two in particular, Maersk and Zim, which of course, Zim is the Israeli cargo shipper, which, as you mentioned, Nora, is, we learned a lot from the recent experiences of the ILWU Local 10 port workers who since 2014 have been blocking Zim vessels from docking in the port of Oakland, so over a decade at this point. And of course, the global, experiences of the South African divestment movement and the critical role that longshoremen played in that struggle. And just to give you a kind of bird's eye view of some of the labor updates that we've had in the past few months, MLK Labor in Seattle endorsed the campaign, and so did the housing workers branch of Unite, which is one of the largest trade unions in the UK. As Kaleem mentioned, we saw dock workers walking off the job in Morocco, refusing to load military cargo. So, we understand that longshoremen, truckers, and workers in logistics have a very key role to play in disrupting the supply chain of genocide. But, we're also at the same time working to get Maersk added to ethical investment screens so that unions in any sector can divest their pension funds from Maersk, as a sort of secondary pressure strategy. And just to place that in the larger context of, what we've seen happening in the labor sector, this year we saw 7 large international unions and basically mega locals send a letter to Biden, asking for an arms embargo. So we see things moving more generally in our movement in the direction of an arms embargo from the bottom up, a people's arms embargo, one that is led by institutions that represent working class people and working class power in this country, in the UK, and globally. So through this campaign, by identifying Maersk as a key target and by drawing attention and researching its exceptional role in the genocide, we're trying to give people a way to operationalize their commitments to an arms embargo into a strategic pressure strategy that directly can disrupt the flow of military goods to Israel. And I also, want to put that in the context of other similar campaigns, such as those taken up by advocates for an energy embargo on Israel. So targeting specifically the supply of military fuel that goes on 2 ships that leave out of Corpus Christi, Texas, every 2 months, go through the Mediterranean, and provide a massive supply of JP-8 military jet fuel that Israel uses to resupply its fighter jets that, every day we see dropping bombs on Gaza, Lebanon, and across the region. So we see all of these struggles as, part of an interconnected movement for a people's arms embargo that is linked to the student movement, that is linked to the labor struggles. And collectively, we hope that, by working in these various sectors and through these various avenues that we can, bit by bit increase and massively increase the reputational, legal, and financial risks and turn the people's embargo into an achievable goal.
Well, it's ambitious. It's essential. From the quality of the research that you've done, that I've seen, you are more than up to it, and I see a lot of hope in that. There are questions that some of our viewers have, that I have just before we go. They want to know where they can learn more, specifically where they can read the report we've been talking about, and how they can support this campaign and get involved themselves.
Yeah, so, sorry, you want to?
No, you go.
So I think the first thing that people can do can go to maersk.com. That is the sort of landing page for the campaign. That's where we have all of the press releases, all of our current research, where we will be putting our, forthcoming research. There's also on that website a Proton Mail account. So if you work in logistics and you are interested in, giving us information that could perhaps help us with the research that we're undertaking, that would be tremendously helpful. And maybe Kaleem can talk about how to get more involved on the local level.
And I'll just say before, sorry to interrupt, Kaleem, Marguerite is asking, because you are called the Palestinian Youth Movement, can old people get involved? I'm also asking for myself too.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Not age restricted, yeah.
The Palestinian Youth Movement it's a group of it's a political organization of young Arabs in the diaspora, with chapters all across the world, in the UK and Canada, the United States, and Italy. So if you live in one of those countries, there are local PYM chapters that are taking up this campaign, who can also serve as nodes to connect those who are not Arab or Palestinian to the broader anti-war movement and people's arms embargo movements that are being activated right now in this moment. And I think what I would also say to people is that this is as much as we are targeting Maersk because of its unique relationship to the defense industry and to the Israeli military, this is also a framework, a logic, let's say, that's much larger than Maersk alone. And we've seen people taking action in their locales against weapons manufacturers, against other logistics companies. And so I would encourage, like, every piece of this puzzle adds our collective action, adds to our collective action ceiling as a movement. And so if there isn't an obvious link to Maersk in your locale, there are certainly pieces of the military and weapons supply chain that Israel depends on. And I think this is part of the political intervention that we're trying to make here. I'll end with one thing. We were struck to find a piece of this story that we didn't get the chance to talk about on this call. We were struck to find that just as military cargo goes in to occupied Palestine to support the ethnic cleansing project that is Zionism, there is also the spoils, let's say, of the stolen land, products that are produced in illegal Israeli settlements that are exported from occupied Palestine to the rest of the world. And so this is a bi-directional relationship. These goods that are produced on stolen land are shipped out to the rest of the world on Maersk vessels and on Zim vessels and many others. And so I think we also have to view this as a full system that is sustaining our people's exploitation and ethnic cleansing and mass death in Gaza. And there are ways for us to take the power back as people and take action on this in a lot of different venues. That's all.
Well,
thank you so much for that. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Ali.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say thank you both. And I see, so in some, check out maerskoffmaersk.com or maerskoffmaersk, Maersk.com. And presumably you'll continue to post updates there. Connect with local groups, maybe connect with the Palestinian youth movement in your country or your city. And I saw someone in the comments ask, do small protests matter? And I'm just going to give my answer, yes. If you're living somewhere where you can't find these connections, get a couple of friends, go out, make signs against this genocide, against the complicity, and go and stand somewhere visible in your community. Because I think that when other people see that people in their community care about this, you will find connections. People will come and talk to you, and you will also give them the courage to go out and to speak up and to say more. So yes, it matters. Every form of visibility and protest against this genocide, against the complicity, matters. So please keep it up. Let's remember what Abubaker told us. Kaleem, Hawa, and Nas Abdel-Al, you're both organizers with the Palestinian Youth Movement. You're doing fantastic work, and we're very grateful to have you on the live stream today. And I hope you'll come back soon and update us on this campaign.
Thank you so much, Nora, Ali. It was a pleasure.
Thank you both. All. It's fantastic. Incredible. I can't wait for them to come back and update us. I think these targeted campaigns, we can't uplift them enough. And the amount of research and data that PYM, the authors of that report, has amassed is just it's incredible. So yeah, again, Mask Off Maersk or Maersk, Maersk.com, and also check out the Palestinian Youth Movement. You are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada live stream. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with Ali Abunimah, and let's bring on Jon for the Resistance Report. Hey, Jon.
Hey, guys. Happy birthday, Abubaker.
Yeah.
And these guys are going to need some more plates after this Resistance Report.
Some more armored plates. Well, sadly, they're probably on the way, but hopefully people power can put a stop to that.
That's right. That's
All
right.
right.
Well,
We'll
a
get
lot
right to
going
it
on
then.
this week. Yeah, let's get into it.
All right. Well, as ever, we're going to start in Gaza. Got a couple maps just so people get situated. I think you're familiar with these maps now, as we are 411 days into this ongoing crime that we can only hope that justice is served to the people that are committing these crimes. Even just sitting here backstage watching this excellent program that we've put together, just enraging what's going on. And like Ali said, even though we're eyeballs deep in this story every single day, it never would never get used to it. Just burn with rage over this. So we are going to focus on the resistance. So this is the map of Gaza. You can see the key corridors that Israel's holding on the south, the Philadelphia corridor, which blocks off the main crossing to the outside world for Palestinians, the Rafah crossing. Khan Yunis, which was the subject of a 6-month destruction campaign. Rafah, 6-month destruction campaign. The death of Yahya Sinwar and Tell Sultan. On the front lines, fighting with his commanders, briefing his commanders, showing that their commanders fight in the same trench in the south of Gaza. We look at the Netzarim corridor. We're probably going to have to widen the corridor. The Israelis have been hard at work committing their genocide and ethnic cleansing on the north side of the Netzarim corridor in Tel Hawa. We saw battles through there in previous months, and of course in Zaytun as well, to widen the corridor. They widened the corridor so much that Netanyahu, the IDF chief of staff, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐭, the Shabak chief, their internal security, and the defense minister and top commanders went and gave a press conference on the beach in the Netzarim corridor yesterday. And there's a couple interesting points that I want to call your attention to. Netanyahu very rarely has interesting points, but these are two of them. So he fawned over his commanders who are committing this brutal genocide. But he also offered this. He said, I will also say that we want those who want to get out of this maze. Whoever brings us hostages and finds a way to do it, we will find you safe passage with your family to get out. And we will also reward you with $5 million per abductee. So he said, the choice is yours. $5 million for Palestinians to give up the captives. And that's an interesting thing, because the Israelis aren't fighting in the tunnels. They're not trying to get the captives back. They never have been. In fact, they hunt the captives. In the examples that the captives had an opportunity to free themselves, they were hunted and killed in Shuja'iyah. So just Netanyahu in the Netzarim corridor. And then we look at this map C here of northern Gaza with the zoom in, and we'll focus on what's happening right now, because we're now in the 2nd month of the siege of Jabalia, the cutting off of Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia. Beit Lahia is not on that map, but it's opposite to Beit Hanun on the western coast. A lot of fighting in Beit Lahia, despite the fact that the Israelis said that there was nobody left there. There are people there. There are people in Jabalia. They're not leaving. They're not going south. They're not going through the corridor into southern Gaza. They're internally displaced inside the north, moving from place to place because the shelters are being targeted. Aid is delivered there, and then the Israeli military surrounds it, arrests the men, boys, anyone over 13 years old, rounds them up, as we saw, and puts them in those trucks that are shipped from the U.S., as our previous guest so well described. More than 2,000 people killed in the Jabalia operation, 6,000 wounded, but we know that those are incomplete numbers, given the fact that the hospitals have been under siege and are not functioning, civil defense not functioning, fire trucks, ambulances, all targeted, unable to function in the north. The brutal situation. More than 1,000 arrests taken to torture camps. Just brutal outcomes of that. And the IDF ridiculously said the other day that there's 100 operatives remain in northern Gaza. So this is going to be ridiculous. I'm going to point that out to you as we go forward. over the next coming weeks about what 100 operatives looks like, because you're going to see 60 of them today on these videos as they destroy armored vehicles and require Maersk to ship new plates to them. So let's start off with number one, starting off with a bang. This was a pretty remarkable operation. This fighter says that he's a wounded fighter. He's wounded in the Battle of Jabalia. He's holding a guerrilla action device with the magnetic strips on the bottom. You can see there. Guerrilla action device is a Yasin 105 warhead that's adapted to become a sticky bomb, essentially. And he says, despite my injury, I carry my warhead towards the enemy, towards their tanks. And he's quoting a sheikh. He says, put the knife to my neck, light my ribs on fire. You will not be able to besiege my thoughts or beliefs for a single hour, or strip me of my beliefs or the light of my certainty. And here he goes, heads out in the middle of a battlefield, runs right up to the tank. Look at the destruction, just criminal destruction all around him. Slides it into the exact spot they're trained to put it, right in the turret gap, right in the front of the turret gap. Pulls the fuse, has about 8 seconds after he pulls the fuse. You can see the fuse burning there before it blasts. So gives the fighters lots of time. These are well-designed weapons that 𝐐𝐫𝐶 has designed to give the fighters time to get out of the way. And you can see it's a devastating hit in the turret gap, the weakest spot on the armored vehicle. And look at, he goes exactly to that spot. He doesn't question it at all. He goes, puts it right into that spot. You're seeing his helmet cam on the right-hand side there, and the spotter on the left. He's going to throw up the victory sign here at the end just to cap off what was a pretty legendary operation, one of the better operations that we've seen in this war. And that's saying something, because we see incredible operations constantly. So, yeah, and we'll take a look. Let's watch it one more time because it's so good. So you can see the magnets underneath there. That's what stick on the armored vehicle. You can see there with his hand that he's holding it. You can see it has instructions on it for the fighters, so that when they're waiting to execute the plan, they're being briefed by what's on the side of the weapon, treating them like professional weapons, despite the fact that they're manufactured in Gaza by the 𝐶𝐶𝐵 brigades for 𝐶𝐶𝐵 fighters. We're watching Gaza-made weapons. Nobody has made a weapon like this before. You are not going to find it elsewhere in the world. Essentially the fighter says he's wounded, he stays in the battle. And the point of it is, what he's saying is, the genocide is not going to erase the struggle for national liberation. Nothing that they can do, nothing the Israelis can do to these fighters, to these civilians, is going to break their spirit for liberation. And Israel's trying. And look at the scene in that shot. Just watch it in all these videos that I'm going to show you in the next 45 minutes. Look at the destruction all around. 20 minutes of 𝐶𝐶𝐵 videos. We'll go to Lebanon after that. So after we watch him do this and throw up the victory sign, I want to show you a couple of still images that will help you understand the inside of the Merkava and what exactly they're trying to do when they put this guerrilla action device. Essentially, a heat-seeking missile that they attach with magnets. So you can see there that this is an Al Jazeera drawing. It's not exactly accurate, but it's basically right. The driver is in the front there on the bottom level. He's in front of the engine. The engine of this tank, of the Merkava, is in the front. Most tanks is in the back. They use it on the front for extra protection. And then you can see on this one, the shadow underneath the turret. That shadow is the turret gap. That's what we're calling the turret gap. And inside the turret are the commander, loader, and gunner, the three key, along with the driver, the three key crew members. And so that's facing one direction. If we look at the next picture, you can see exactly, this marks on it exactly where they insert that guerrilla action device, right beside the commander, right in his face, right beside the gunner, right in their face. These are devastating weapons that are being placed by hand exactly where they're supposed to be placed. This is from War Thunder. And in the back there, it has shells. They don't usually have the shells there. What they have there is room for other infantry soldiers and other crew from other tanks. So sometimes people ask, like, what happens when the tank gets disabled and they're in the middle of the battle? they run out the back door of the tank and they run into the neighboring tank, and there's room for an infantry squad or for crew in the back of that Merkava. So that's what they do. And that's why sometimes the tanks are left for periods of time. We saw that in Rafah, where that tank got hit 3 times by a guerrilla action device because it was not moving. So commander, gunner, loader are the 3 key people up in that top of that hatch. The guerrilla action device penetrates 600 millimeters, which is way more than the turret gap has of armor. It is the weakest point on the tank because, as you can imagine, with the way the tank is shaped, they're not expecting hand-delivered munitions. And so they have an active protection system that tries to stop incoming rounds, but you're carrying the round with your hand and putting it in the exact place it needs to be put. So 𝐓𝐡𝐞 does that through all these operations. Maybe after the war, when there's time, I'll reorganize these videos and show you all the guerrilla action device operations. You'll see that they do that all the time in the exact spot. Excellent trained fighters executing a very brave task, wounded in battle. You can't stop them with that. So that's a remarkable operation. And that is in the Jabalia camp. This next one here, number 2, is also in the Jabalia camp. And here's another remarkable thing. They're sitting here with a 60-year-old elder. He says, in the company of this Hajj, who is 60 years of age, who refused to live in humiliation and disgrace, refused to flee, and asked for the resistance in the way of God. He says, we will wear out this enemy which flexes its strength on women and children and commits massacres day after day. And they say to the Hajj, you're a blessing. And the old man says, you're the blessing. And then they give him a kiss here, and then they go to battle. And watch how they go to battle. Out through the mouse hole in the house, so you don't have to walk out in the street, through the mouse hole in the next house. The fighters are living in their own neighborhoods. They know how to move through these buildings that still stand. Israel's trying to drop all the buildings in Jabalia, but that's where you see there. You see the Yasin 105 pulls up his sights. We're going to see a Namr troop carrier enter the screen here, and he's going to fire from an elevated firing position, which is advantageous for the angle that it strikes the armored vehicle, requiring the plates to be replaced at best. That's the luckiest version of what happens when you're hit with a Yasin 105, which can penetrate 700 millimeters of rolled homogeneous armor. So seeing them move through the streets, I kept this one in here because this is actually, he's firing an RPG-7 here, anti-tank warhead, and you're going to watch, he's going to miss here. He just misses over the top, shot across the bow. The tanker would see that shell explode in front of him. But I just wanted to put that because we never see that. We see successful operations. Occasionally we see interceptions. But they don't just show us these videos because they went out and carried out the action. They show us successful operations. Here comes a third one. And this is being filmed by a closed circuit television camera, which is something that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 has all over the neighborhoods to watch these operations. So, and number 3, we're going to see the Israelis set up in a house here. They're setting up on the 3rd floor of the house. You can see him poking his face through here. We blurred that out, but you can find these on my Twitter at Jon Elmer. Maybe tomorrow I can put it up on the ticker at some point. We are following the community guidelines and blurring out, but you can see he's got an RPG-7 here. He's got an anti-tank warhead, and he's going to fire it right through the window that soldier was out looking out. And there's been a number of killed soldiers this week. The Israelis themselves admitted 8 killed this week. And as I've been saying throughout the war, the numbers never add up. So maybe they'll fill in some after the fact. And here we're hearing gunfire. The shaking is the gunfire because they're firing into the building after it. So you can see that they're spotting their position with intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And then they're being able to move through the buildings, through the mouse holes, through the neighborhoods that they know, and get up close to get the perfect shot in this fierce battle where Israel has drones, multiple drones, layers of drones in the air, and all these armored vehicles that you're going to see throughout this operation. This was one of 5 operations against troop positions since you last saw me. This is one of them. And we can go after this to number 4, because this is a complex ambush of a tank company here. This is ambushes of death, as they've been calling them. And you can see the fighters here setting up, digging, burying their Shawad. We're seeing a Shawad EFP, explosively formed penetrator, and that's the 𝐄𝐥𝐿, it's called. That is an anti-personnel weapon that's essentially made by unexploded ordnance. They fill up those buckets, and then they put shrapnel in those buckets. And then you can see this company of tanks moving through. There's a dozen or so. And they're going to pull up to this intersection to hold this intersection because they don't have infantry support, as we've been watching for 411 days. So they get blasted by the Shawad there. The EFP is the first shot, and then the second shot is going to be of the 𝐄𝐥𝐿, which is going to be buried as well, and it's going to come in from the side. We're seeing 3 different views of the first Shawad here. This is where we're going to see the 𝐄𝐥𝐿. It comes in from the side against the maintenance crew that's coming out to presumably do maintenance on the tank that got hit, and so they're hit in the ambush as well. So they're setting this ambush. The Israelis are driving right into the ambush, and they're hitting them. So right now they're 2 for 2 with these 3 weapons that they planted. And here comes the third. This is versus a Namr troop carrier, and this is another Shawad. That might have been an Ashgarit troop carrier, actually. Yeah, it's an Ashgarit troop carrier, which is even going to be in worse shape than the Namr. And the Maersk activist did a great job of describing the vehicle. The Namr is a Merkava. It's the same hull. The Merkava has a turret on top of it, but otherwise it's the same vehicle. We can do number 5 tomorrow. This is against D9 bulldozers. The D9 bulldozers have been busy in Jabalia. It's part of the ethnic cleansing. They're trying to do it on the cheap, so they send in these bulldozers that are barely armed. They have slat armor trying to protect them. It's not good enough. And you can see there, that's a direct hit with a Yasin 105, which is far more than capable of destroying that. But look at the devastated terrain, as the Israelis call it. Like, look at what we're looking at here. The fighters are using the destruction of their society to blow up these D9 bulldozers, which are in short supply, especially when you're fighting on 2 fronts, although Israel doesn't seem too keen on fighting in the northern front. But these bulldozers have been devastated. We saw more than a dozen of these blown up in this show alone, and last show we saw even more. So these bulldozers are not faring well. Some of them might be remotely operated. Elbit makes a system that can turn these into remotely operated bulldozers, because really their job is to just push over the buildings. They push over the buildings that have been bombed, bombed from the air, bombed by anti-tank mines, and then they strike them. It just, like I said, just look at all of these videos and look at the destruction, and just hope that justice comes to the people that are committing this. It's unbelievable. So number 6, oh yeah, excellent. This is what a D9 looks like. So you can see inside with the commander and the driver, they operate in 2-man teams, and you can see the amount of protection that they have. It's not much. A standard RPG anti-tank round would destroy that slat armor. And so a Yasin 105 with a tandem charge does really significant damage. And as you can see in the cab, there's not a lot of room. So there's not a lot of missing who's in the crew when you're hitting these. So I thought I brought those visuals just so people could see what it looks like inside these behemoths that we just see from the outside. So thanks for doing that, Tamara. So 6 is, this is an interesting one. Qassam identifies, again, we're watching CCTV footage here. Qassam identifies this as a troop carrier. That's what it says on the screen there. But watch when it gets hit with a Yasin. Yeah, so that's an explosion that we don't usually see. So I'm going to say that that's going to be an unmanned, remotely operated M113 Zelda, which the IDF has been using to act as truck bombs. a tank bomb. They fill it with munitions and they drive it and blow it up in an intersection to take down houses. This is all their budget genocide that they're carrying out now. It's cheaper to do. They also have all these M113s that are aluminum and they're not battle ready. They can't go to Gaza in these vehicles. So they have thousands of them from the Americans, from their big brother, handed them down to them along with their allowance. And they converted them. They converted them into car bombs. They used them as car bombs. So Qassam intercepted that car bomb and blew it up pretty good. We've seen that before. We've seen these 113s before. I've been talking about them for many months. We first saw them being deployed in Khan Yunis back in, I don't know, but back earlier in the war, when the battle was raging in Khan Yunis, we first saw them. So number 7, this is interesting because I want you to look at the tip of the warhead that he's got here. He's got a tandem 85. We'll show you it in better after, but this archer with his tandem 85, his buddy's saying it's not you who threw, it's God who threw, which is what they always say to the archers. And then we're going to see a Merkava tank moving through the total destruction. Not one of those buildings is habitable. But that's what the bulldozers are doing. They'll come up to that building you see dead straight ahead, and they'll just push it over. That's what the bulldozers do. In some cases, the bulldozers have to clear the way. There's the tank entering the screen there, dead center. And you're going to see from an elevated firing position, again, no trophy intercept on that. Trophy tries to intercept the active protection system on the tank, tries to intercept between 10 and 30 meters. So there's no way it's getting that one. Qassam believes that it does. And then the spotter says, we got it, pull out. So you can hear the way that the two communicate with each other. Now we look at 7B. So I did a still frame here. This to show you. What we're looking at there is the 85 millimeter RPG-7 shell that are essentially not good enough for the up armored, for the number of plates that the Merkava and the Namr put on. They add extra plates on top of plates to make thickness that the RPG-7 doesn't penetrate. So what we're looking at here is the extension on the end. They put the 64 millimeter on the end there. But they turn it into a tandem, the tandem 85. But what we're looking at here is really interesting because I've shown you this a couple times before, but this is obviously proving the case that they are manufacturing these right now in Jabalia. Jabalia has been the subject of 3 major invasions. The north and the south are cut off from each other by the Netzarim corridor. The manufacturing is happening on a localized level. It's Jabalia that's rebuilding their weaponry, and that is a clear indication of it to see an unpainted warhead on the end of their 85 millimeter RPG. So interesting development. We've been watching that throughout the war to see how the manufacturing was continued, and that is proof for sure right there. It is a good shot of the archer just before going into battle. So we could go to number 8 now. This is a soldier who's got his head popped out of the probably the commander's hatch, and he gets fired on here in Jabalia camp. And this is interesting at the end. We're going to watch here. So you see he's got the FN Mag 7.62 mounted machine gun. And in a November 12th field report, Qassam said Qassam fighters were able to target a Zionist Merkava tank with a Yassin 105 shell, then boarded it and seized a machine gun from it near the Al-Farkura school west of Jabalia camp. So they captured that gun off of the top of the tank, which is really interesting. And actually, it was one of the first experiences that I had in Palestine when tanks were in the streets of Jenin, and I was working, and a particularly precocious kid hopped up on the tank and was trying to reef off the mounted machine gun. And when he jumped down back off the tank, I was kind of like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm trying to get the gun off." Like, dummy, what do you think I'm doing? And that was my welcome to Palestine moment. But yeah, captured weapon, always a trophy weapon that the Palestinians will have for many years to come. People will see it. So number 9, this is a night operation. We don't see a ton of night operations, but there's a D9 armored bulldozer. Again, they're in the forefront of the battle in Jabalia. So they're going to fire on this. You're going to see the Yasin fire. So you see the 2 flashes. You could see the first flash there, and the second flash is exploding on the D9 bulldozer built by Caterpillar in the United States. If you want to have a complementary campaign to the Maersk campaign, it's Caterpillar's being shipped as well. So and now we want to move to Beit Lahia, because this was all from Jabalia camp. Jabalia camp's been fighting fierce. This is Beit Lahia. Again, another tank hit from an elevated firing position. The Israelis have told us that Beit Lahia was empty of fighters, but doesn't seem that's the case. Again, so now that you saw that picture of what the D9 looks like, now you can imagine how close everything is when you get hit from, I don't know, what is that, 40 meters at the most, by a tandem charge warhead. So that's the second operation of 3 in Beit Lahia. There's one more coming here against a tank commander riding outside of his tank. And he's going to get an elevated Yasin strike. So the resistance is all over. This is not the same cell running around harassing the Israelis. These are the Qassam army still intact, fighting in the north amid this scorched earth genocide. And the battle continues. And I'm going to continue to bring you these videos to show you from the Palestinians' eyes. Like, literally, these are coming from their cameras, their helmet cameras, and they're showing these to be seen by the world, to show what is going on, to show that they're not surrendering, and the civilians as well. The civilians aren't surrendering and going to South Gaza. They're not. They're just displaced because the shelter was burned down literally by the Israelis. You can see the Israeli TikToks taking credit for burning the schools down. But they just moved to another place. They're not giving in. And I think I described it on the show last week, but after the shelter was burnt down, there was a massive demo, and the men marched down the street chanting death before dishonor. Like, no, it's not, you're not going to defeat them by massacring people's families and destroying with scorched earth. That's not going to win this war. So number 12 is and just great, like, just the artistic videography of that is just the layout. Qassam is getting even better as the war goes on. This is an elevated Yasin strike on a Namr troop carrier that will need new plates. That's how they fix them, multiple plates. And we don't know a lot about that because Israel keeps that part a secret. They don't let that information out, and that is part of their keeping their morale up. Same reason they lie about casualties and lie about how many people were wounded. They lie about how many plates they needed to get sent. So the Mask Off Maersk campaign is something I'm very interested in, to see how they reverse engineer the statistics from shipping and try to put those statistics together to understand how many of these armored vehicles have been destroyed, because we're watching them, 411 days. I guess, right on October 7th, we saw the tanks being destroyed. There was a dozen on October 7th. Yeah, so 13, is that 13? Are we at 13? 13 is another D9. Again, look at the landscape, just brutal. But the fighters are using it to their advantage and blowing up another set of soldiers, or it's remotely operated, because some of these are remotely operated. But there's also casualties. And like I said, 8 casualties just in this week alone admitted by the Israelis. And this is an operation in the Netzarim corridor, number 15 here. This is a joint operation with the Ansar brigades and Qassam. So they're finding an Israeli position in the Netzarim corridor, not where Netanyahu was, but in one of these buildings, again, where they believe by bulldozing 7 kilometers, they give themselves space we have to edit that video. But again, you can check my Twitter. Maybe we can throw it up on the Chiron there if people want to check them out, because that was a hit. And calculating the distance and the speed of the bullet, that's a 1.2 kilometer hit. So a significant distance on that operation. And just before we wrap up on Gaza, so 8 Shawad operations versus tanks, EFPs versus tanks, 16 Yassins versus tanks, 3 versus APCs, 12 Yassins versus D9 bulldozers, 4 IEDs and anti-personnel IEDs versus troops, 4 close quarters battles in which 4 soldiers were killed in close quarters battles, including 1 battle where fighters came up from a tunnel and hit the Israelis, 9 sniper operations, and then the rockets and mortars are constant. They're going on all the time. I don't bring you those videos because we don't have time to show all of them, but they're constantly harassing the Israelis in the Netzarim corridor, and now in Jabalia, they're firing mortars in Jabalia as well. And as we know, the Israelis have 35 injured a day, more than 1,000 a month go into the rehab department. So on top of the killed in action is the number that go into rehab, 35 per day on average. So those numbers are likely up because the battle in Jabalia is fierce, it's ongoing, shows no signs of ending, and there is way more than 100 to 200 fighters, like the IDF said. That is a ridiculous claim in a war of ridiculous claims. So that is the Gaza front. We're going to move up now to Lebanon, where things have been developing as well. This is, again, I'm going to bring you this Institute for the Study of War map and kind of mock it, because the blue that you see, the dark blue, that's Israel. That's inside Israel. They make it look like some kind of troop movements. It's not. It's the Israeli border. The light blue is where Israeli troops have been at some point. And if you read the fine print down at the bottom there, it says, assesses forces have operated or launched attacks. It doesn't mean that they're there or hold that territory. On the contrary, it means in almost every case that they withdraw back down to the border. They're not attempting to move deep into Lebanon, despite the fact that they announced 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞 on November 12th, just before we went on air last week, that the Israelis are expanding their operations in Lebanon. They're moving on to the second stage. And he announced that in the evening, late at night on the 12th. On the morning of November 13th, after announcing this, that they're going to move to the edge of the next village, to the first village. They call it the second line of defense because the border is the first line. So they call it second line villages. When you're hearing second line villages, it doesn't mean that they've conquered the first line of villages and are moving into the second. It means the border counts as one. And so now they're maybe going to go into the village. But this is what happened. 10 a.m. the morning after, so like a few hours later, from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., a fierce gunfight between Hezbollah and Golani troops. The IDF said 6 Israeli soldiers were killed during the fighting. They all served in the Golani's 51st Battalion. The clash took place 6 kilometers into Lebanon, where they withdrew after taking those casualties. The inevitable Hezbollah said the inevitable outcome of the second phase will be more losses and more failure. So a 3-hour gunfight met Halevi's bragging about the expansion of the operation, and since then we haven't seen it. They might have moved an additional kilometer. Based on IDF reports, an additional kilometer into Lebanon. But what they have done is on November 14th, they're carrying out more than 100 airstrikes a day in Lebanon. On November 14th, 113 airstrikes, targeting main targets were the civil defense, paramedics, the civil defense center in Baalbek, killed 20 personnel, paramedics, and then there was 12 martyrs in the civil defense crew in Duris. So attacking paramedics, like I showed you last week, and of course, like Israel has bragged about doing all over Gaza, killing paramedics and killing them with double taps. You bomb the place, and then you wait till the rescue workers come to save people's lives, and then you bomb it again. So this map that you're looking at. This is the western sector over to the eastern sector. There's one more map I'll show you just to see that it's this consistent. Just barely perceptible advances. Again, the dark blue is inside Israel. The light blue is where they have moved in Lebanon. You can see where the villages are. They're not in the villages. They're on the outskirts of the villages. The way the map reads, if you put a dot instead of the name, the village isn't there. That's only the name only goes into the blue because it's written. If you just did a dot, you would see that they are not in the villages. They may go into the villages, but again, we haven't seen that yet. And Hezbollah keeps saying we're waiting for it. So we'll see how it goes. Israel also looks like they're trying to get an off-ramp in some sort of ceasefire negotiations that Nora pointed out. Classic Israeli ceasefire negotiations where they get to continue firing. So only one side has to cease firing and Israel gets to carry on firing. The most remarkable ceasefire the English language allows. So let's look at number 20 here. This is just further proof because Hezbollah has these weapons. We've been watching them for the whole year. This is the Al-Mas. This is a top attack anti-tank guided missile that was reverse engineered after it was captured in Bint Jbeil during the 2006 war. You can see it's here, these excavators that are opening the hole in the wall. They're on the wall. They're on the border. They're not in the villages. They're not doing what they're doing in Jabalia, where they're knocking down houses. And the Al-Mas has a camera on board the missile. If Israel was moving forward in numbers, they would be doing it in their armored vehicles, and we would be seeing their armored vehicles blow up. Their armored vehicles are blowing up. They blew up 4 tanks since the announcement of the second phase. So they are hitting tanks, but 4 tanks, we just saw 12 tanks in that one intersection in Jabalia. So they don't appear interested in expanding this war. They're not right at this stage. They're not capable of making this fight, which is the point I've been making for months. But that may change, and we have to be aware of it because it may change. But as we see right now, we're just seeing airstrikes. We're seeing dropping buildings as their goal. Look at 21. This is an interesting operation. This is a qualitative operation that if Nasrallah was still alive, he would be telling us about this operation. This is the Kuria. This is the campus. This is the defense campus in downtown Tel Aviv, surrounded by human shields. And these towers are all what host the main installations of the defense ministry in these towers. This is Rabin Camp. This is the base named after Yitzhak Rabin. But they're going to show us all these towers, this Kinneret towers for the general staff, the IDF general staff, the Amman, the military intelligence is in here. The Navy, the Army, the ground forces, all have these towers. That's why it's called the campus, because it's this series of towers and buildings. And some of them are mixed use. Some of them, they have civilian applications inside the same tower. And there's a proposal to expand the campus that would have more mixed use so that they can embed more civilians into their military infrastructure in a rather shocking way. The Kuria is shocking. So Hezbollah hits this. And I think what Nasrallah would have said is he would have said, they have a surprise, and he would have shown us this remarkable information that's being shared with us, which is that every building is being marked. They're talking about the Ministry of Defense, the General Staff building here. They're showing the General Staff Defense Ministry, the ministry, they call it the Ministry of War. And then they're going to show us the helipad, and then they're going to show us each of the offices, the 13th floor office for the Office of Chief of Intelligence. They're going to show us the Office of the Minister of Defense. They're going to show us the Chief of Staff's office, the Deputy Chiefs of Staff's office, and the Secretary of the Supreme Command. And on the upper floor, they're going to show us the Commander of the Ground Forces and the Department of Weapons Development. And so this is Hezbollah's response to the bombing of the Dahia. Israel bombed the Dahia 40 times last week. and targeting the Dahia. And so this was Hezbollah's response, was to target the Kiryat. If we go to the next one, you'll see the weapons that they used to do that. Again, they give us these maps to show you where we're looking at. And there it is again. And we saw it in quite a drawing, set of drawings. I'm not sure what the proper term for those drawings are, but you see them launch the drones. They launch the drones to distract the air defense systems and to get people saying there's drones, and get fighter jets up in the air to try to shoot down these drones. And then they're going to fire their heavy missiles, their 𝐓𝐡𝐞 missiles, which is a comparable missile to a Mark 84 that the Maersk people talked about that are being shipped. Again, underground missile bases. Israel says they've knocked out 80% of Hezbollah's rockets. Again, just a completely absurd statement. That sounds to me like they're trying to get out of this war by saying that. That's for public consumption at home. It's not a military assessment. It's an absurd assessment. So they're hitting them here with 𝐓𝐡𝐞 missiles. They are 250 kilometer range and 400 kilogram warhead, which is comparable to the 2,000-pound Mark 84. Now, this one's interesting. This is another first. This is Hezbollah firing precision-guided missiles, not deep into Israel, but into Lebanon, into the troops mustering. And this is where they are. You can see where they were in that previous shot. They're out in the trees. They're not in the villages. And these are Nasser 1 guided missiles that are being fired on the troops mustering inside Lebanon. And yesterday was the first day where there was more operations inside Lebanon than inside Palestine, inside Israel, since the battle began 2 months ago. So you can see them there. That's where they're mustering, and then they're being hit by these truck-launched precision-guided missiles. That the missiles entered service on October 14th. That was the first time we saw them. But this is the first time that we're seeing them being used inside Lebanon on troops inside Lebanon, something that they will continue to do the longer this war goes on. This is how Hezbollah responds to stage 2. We can do 24 now. These are 𝐓𝐡𝐶6s. These are the first time we've seen these. These are also precision guided. This is the Tal Nof base. This is the oldest Air Force base in Israel, oldest Israeli Air Force base. The Ein Sharmer is an RAF base, the UK, Britain at the time, I guess, air base that's older, but this is the oldest Israeli one. 140 kilometers from the border, which includes F-16s and drones and specializes in electronic warfare. And then you see the size of these 𝐓𝐡𝐶6s that are going to be launched. A 𝐓𝐡𝐶6 is a 140 kilo warhead with a 225 kilometer range. Again, fired from underground launchers that can't be knocked out after the launch. And targeting the air bases. So Hezbollah, while Israel massacres civilians, Hezbollah is targeting all of the strategic air bases from Tel Aviv north, particularly focusing on the Haifa area. In the next ones, we're going to see this is in Jaffa, this base, and then Hezbollah shows us these are people fleeing the sirens. Hezbollah shows us settler cameras, shows us Israeli cameras, something that Qassam doesn't do, probably because of the nature of the war is a bit different, and there's no Israelis except soldiers, and we already have soldiers in the Qassam video. So yeah, so 24B is drone up against a Haifa naval base again. So they're hitting these key bases that are part of the battle. And here we're seeing drone footage overnight. You can see in the bottom right corner, they actually have the map. You can follow it going over all of these key sites. And the key sites are the Haifa Technical Base, the Haifa Naval Base, Stella Maris Base, Tir Carmel Base, Nesher Base. Haifa Technical Base is an Air Force base that includes training for Air Force technicians. that are attacking Lebanon. The Haifa naval base, along with the Navy, hosts missile boats and submarines that have been attacking Lebanon. Stella Maris is a strategic monitoring and maritime surveillance base 35 kilometers from the border. Tirat Carmel base, a housing and logistics hub, transportation battalion, and northern region. So they're hitting their logistics. And the Nesher base is the gas station for the Israeli army, 40 kilometers from the border, southeast of Haifa. So qualitative operations. The Nasser 1 is the first missiles that they use. Those are 100 kilogram, 100 kilometer warhead, and they are precision guided. The Nasser is the Fadi with a precision guided kit. And Nasrallah talked about the precision guided project that Hezbollah had been carrying out, and now we're seeing it. It's to turn the other so-called dumb rockets into smart rockets that can hit their target within a 5-meter radius. So we have before us now, we are watching the escalation of this war as Israel upped its numbers. In this, again, you can see the flyover drone footage that we saw from back in the summer when Hezbollah flew drones over Israel and showed us the Hudhud drones that were flown over all over. They were flown over the Golan. They were flown all over Haifa. They were flown over Ramat David Air Base. We saw those. I showed you those. You remember back in the summer. Qualitative operations. Hezbollah has carried out 200 operations in phase 2 that began on November 12th. They're firing 100 rockets a day. They've carried out 200 operations. They've carried out 1,350 operations in the 2 months since the pager operation, averaging 22 a day, showing no sign of command and control being knocked out. We're seeing these operations take place and the ground battles take place without disruption. But Herzi Halevi, the chief of staff, said that Hezbollah's chain of command has collapsed. So we're going to just hold on to that quote as we move forward in this war, because it's clearly not true. Number 25 is a PSYOP that Hezbollah put out called the Vortex of Hell. And it shows the bases that I just read to you, the naval bases, the Haifa Naval Base, the Air Technical College, the Nesher fuel base, jet fuel base, and the naval base. And they're saying that they're making it a vortex of hell. They quote the mayor down there in the small type. The mayor saying, Hezbollah will not spare us, and the city is their primary target. So another Hezbollah PSYOP and then there's one more PSYOP for you here, the last one. And this is mocking the Israeli military censor, because what we're seeing there is a tank sinking in the sands of South Lebanon. But it says a significant, what they say, it's a difficult security event in the north of the country. Yedio Aeronaut, our sons are burning inside Merkava tanks, and a whole group of the Golani Brigade is sinking in the quicksands of South Lebanon. Just mocking the military censor that, doesn't allow any of this information. All of this that we're seeing is not allowed to be shown. It's considered one of the 7 main tenets of the Israeli military intelligence censor. And journalists in Israel have to sign, in order to get a press card, have to sign that they'll follow those rules or they'll go to jail. And any American or international news organization that wants to report through their bureaus will do that as well. And the Associated Press and the New York Times do that. So they're subject to the military censor. So Hezbollah is showing us new weapons, new tactics for the second phase of this war, still in the battle in every way that you would imagine them to be, while still playing it careful. They're not trying to pull Israel into an all-out war, but they're escalating when Israel escalates, and that's something that Nasrallah said to us all many times. When Israel escalates, we'll be ready, and that's what we're seeing here. So that is the resistance report for this week from Gaza and Lebanon. The battle continues.
Indeed, the battle continues. I wanted to ask a little bit, if you could talk a little bit about the options for an off ramp to the, according to the Israelis, like as you said, they've struck blow after blow to Hezbollah's capabilities, except when you see the actual news that's coming out and you watch John's reports. Even just yesterday, there were I think 3 Israeli battalions that were hit, one after the next after the next. It's like that old joke of the guy who goes and gets a cat from the shelter, and then the cat gets eaten by a coyote. So he goes and he gets another cat from the shelter, and again that one gets eaten by a coyote. And his neighbor's like, "It looks like you're just feeding cats to the coyote." It's the fact that Israel, and this happened yesterday. It was, I think, in a span of 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah, they're doing them in packs, and that's what when they struck that Haifa circle, the vortex of hell. They do it in minute intervals, and there's rocket barrages, and then they've been firing rockets. So like I said, yesterday was the first day that there was more operations inside Lebanon than inside Israel. Wow. So they're hitting their troops with missiles inside of Lebanon on the border, where the Israeli positions are, not in villages, because they don't have forward positions inside villages. And they'll hit them, and they hit them in 5-minute intervals over and over and over again. And that was what they were doing yesterday. Their operational tempo has not changed at all. If anything, it was 34 operations yesterday. That's in the upper part of their operations. They've averaged 22 operations a day. There's a whole list of the operations that they've carried out. The numbers of operations are pretty remarkable. They're able to, they've hit 450 just in the 2 months, 450 settlements, 361 military bases, 164 military sites, 127 border positions, 25 advancements attempts. So that's firing on troops with artillery, and then the Israelis withdraw. 29 drones and fired on 58 cities. They've destroyed 61 military vehicles, 53 command centers, 30 artillery positions. So there's no evidence for what Israel is claiming.
Yeah.
There's no evidence.
Yeah. What could, and Ali and Asa, please jump in too. What could an off-ramp look like for the Israelis in terms of Lebanon? That quote of Netanyahu's that I highlighted in the news of a ceasefire deal will mean that, we, Israel, can still keep bombing Lebanon. What is it? Yeah. What has to happen?
Yeah. Naim Qassem spoke today, and he said that they're not, Israel's not getting something through negotiations that they can't win on the battlefield.
Yeah.
And that's just the standard position that these guys, Qassam is the same. They don't flip-flop their positions. They make their positions clear. They state them over and over again. Hezbollah is prepared to fight a battle of attrition. If that's what Israel wants, that's what Israel is going to get, a battle of attrition. And that's what they said in Gaza too. We're ready for a battle of attrition. That's what Abu Ubaidah said on October 7th on the anniversary speech. They're prepared for a battle of attrition. They're not going to surrender. You're not getting Lebanese territory in a negotiation. You have to take it on the battlefield, and they're not able to.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with Justin Poda, who we of course had on a couple of weeks ago, but who continues to do his excellent sit reps. And I think we have to not make the mistake of thinking that the Israelis are rational in the sense that they're looking for some kind of way out. They, with all the losses they've taken, they should be looking for a way out. But they're not. They continue to expand the war. They continue to hope that something will come up. What we didn't achieve in Gaza will somehow miraculously achieve in Lebanon. And we see from the videos that John showed us, I mean, incredible stuff week after week. And now on day 411, we're seeing operations that are as effective, if not more effective in Gaza than on day 1 or day 2 or day 7 in terms of just the ability to destroy Israeli military equipment and presumably the personnel who've been sent to perpetrate this genocide. And what Israel, all this talk now of the Biden administration, Amos Hochstein, the former Israeli tank commander, who is Joe Biden's, literally a former Israeli tank commander, who is Joe Biden's envoy to Lebanon, are hoping that Hezbollah will agree to surrender terms to Israel. But the thing is, no one is going to surrender when they haven't lost the war. And on the contrary, when they're winning the war. And so unfortunately, the thing I want most is for this war to end for the people in Gaza and the people in Lebanon. But I have to say, I don't think that's going to happen. Israel is going to have to be defeated first and foremost on the battlefield by the resistance if this war is going to end. I think that's the way it has to. I think the way it will end is in Israeli military defeat, social defeat, an economic defeat. And the components of that are the resistance on the ground, first and foremost, but also the whole chain of resistance we see across the region, and of course the popular solidarity and protest around the world, which increases the economic and political pressure on this genocidal regime and aims to weaken its pillars and foundations of support, which are primarily in the so-called West, in the so-called democracies. But the Israelis are not just going to decide that we want to end this. And there is the Netanyahu factor in the sense that Netanyahu's personal interest, his political interest, is to continue and expand the war, and particularly to keep it going until Trump takes the oath of office, hoping that something will come up. Trump will have some kind of magic Wunderwaffen, wonder weapons, perhaps, that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris don't have, which is not the case. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, I'm throwing in Kamala Harris there because she's disappeared in the last week, and I want to remind people she exists.
She's still there.
The Vice President of the United States. She is still a genocidal war criminal, and
she's still working tirelessly around the clock for a ceasefire.
Still working tirelessly for this genocide, and that's So anyway, I've gone on, but my point is, then there's not going to be somehow a negotiated ceasefire anytime soon. I don't think that's likely. And
not on these terms, that's for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say, John?
Well, it's just interesting. Army radio went into one of the villages, one of the edges of the villages with the military, and the brigadier general told Army radio that the settlers in the north can go home now.
Right.
So it's kind of like a statement of like,
right,
that was an off ramp. This is say that that they have knocked out, not Hezbollah, but knocked out the threat of an invasion from like when Hezbollah would come down and take the Galilee, and that Israel could carry out effectively a unilateral ceasefire, which doesn't require any negotiation, just requires them bombing whenever they feel like it. But they're trying to claim on the one hand that they have achieved something, which was the goal of this, was to bring the settlers back home. And Nasrallah famously said, the settlers are not coming back home.
Right.
And the destruction that we're seeing now in the settlements in northern occupied Palestine, Israel, is only getting bigger in terms of what Hezbollah is capable of doing, and it's spreading further. Of course, as you point out, John, that Hezbollah escalates after Israel escalates. But Hezbollah is showing that it still has a lot of ability to escalate. It has not used its most powerful or long-range weapons by a long shot. And so the idea that Israelis are going to go back to these settlements when they're just being reduced to rubble. Yes, Israel is reducing Lebanese villages to rubble. There's no question about that. And there's no question that Israel has the power to do that. But what Hezbollah is showing for the first time in terms of the scale and the duration of this is that they are capable of inflicting severe damage and probably, what's less visible but extremely salient for Israelis is disruption to daily life.
Right.
That even if you can return to your settlement in the north, you can't conduct normal life there. You can't conduct normal business. You'd just be sort of a brave pioneer trying to brave it out amid the ruins and the rockets. And that is not a path back to any kind of quote unquote normality for Israel.
No, and the settlers have even said very recently that they have no intention of going back to the north. They've moved to Tel Aviv, they've moved to different areas of occupied Palestine, but they've, I can't, and also the economic factor, right? Like talk about an element of the war of attrition, and you mentioned this, Ali. It's also financial. The Israeli state, there is no economy in the north. It's just completely, it's gone, and it won't be coming back. And we'll have more on this, hopefully in the next few weeks when we can talk more in depth about Israel's economic state. That the level of bankruptcy that the state is experiencing right now is something that they will never recover from. And that's part of the overall war of attrition that Israel is losing amongst a lot of other losses. So anyway, so much more to come on that. Asa, you had a breaking story this week. That was an update from the one that we talked about last week about the violent Israeli football fan thugs in Amsterdam, and more of the fallout on how the corporate media has capitulated to Israel's version of events.
Yeah, that's right, Nora. So my latest story is titled NY Times Killed Investigation of Israeli Hooligans Internal Email Reveals, and we managed to obtain an email, an internal New York Times email, and when I say obtain, the poor guy CC'd us by mistake, and it's it's kind of amusing in that way.
Perhaps accidentally on purpose, sort of thing. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, according to his manager, it was unintentional. So we'll take that. Yeah. So
if anyone else, sorry to interrupt you, if anyone else from the New York Times is watching, and you want to contact us confidentially or otherwise, or to inadvertently CC us anything, we're very happy.
Always open.
Always open. Yeah.
Yeah.
My DMs are open.
Yeah, exactly. So it was the visual investigations reporter Christian Tribert. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing his name. He's a Dutch reporter, and essentially he followed up on some of the New York Times' initial reporting on this incident, where, as we reported last week in the stream, that essentially there was a pogrom, but it was a pogrom by Israeli football hooligans against Dutch citizens who showed any kind of support for Palestinians or were of Muslim or other migrant backgrounds, heritages. So the violence was carried out by the Israeli football hooligans, the fans of Maccabi Tel Aviv. Here's the actual email on screen here from Christian Tribet. To be fair to him, it does seem that he tried to do the right thing, and he proposed an investigation at what he called a minute by minute visual investigation I was conducting into the events of the 6th to the 8th of November in Amsterdam. Unfortunately, that story was killed. He wrote, "I regret that the planned moment by moment visual investigation was not further pursued. This has been very frustrating to say the least." And it was addressed to Charlie Statlander, who was one of the people who I was talking to over email, trying to solicit comment on criticisms of the New York Times' highly misleading coverage, where they showed the opposite. They claimed it was an anti-Semitic attack and so forth, with no evidence. Incidentally, I discovered it had been previously reported by The Intercept that this New York Times spokesperson, basically a chief press officer in regards to newsroom and opinion, Charlie Statlander, he was also a former senior press officer for the NSA, the U.S. National Security Agency, spy agency, essentially, and also for the U.S. Army. So,
he was
revolving door there.
If I'm not incorrect, he was also a spokesperson for the U.S.-led occupation forces in Afghanistan. So
that's right.
This man is a professional defender of occupation and aggression and genocide.
Yeah, it's quite interesting what these kinds of people put openly on their LinkedIn profiles, boasting of these things that they've done. So, yeah, the visual, the visual investigations reporter seemed to want to carry out a kind of reporting that would set the record straight, and that was killed. That was killed by the New York Times, and they've been on kind of damage control operations since then, and they've been denying this. Once they realized that their email had been inadvertently copied to us, Statlander actually did follow up with me, and he tried to sort of downplay it and say, well, it wasn't actually killed. We just decided to use the reporting that he and his team had gathered and put it into another story. And there was a similar internal email obtained, another internal email obtained by Ryan Grimm of Dropsite News, which put out by another editor, Phil Pan, who put out a very similar sort of spin internally within the New York Times, saying the same thing, and you can see it on screen here. You may have seen an article in the online outlet Electronic Intifada criticizing our coverage of the violence in Amsterdam and making the claim that we killed a visual investigation. I wanted you to know this is untrue. We merged material from the visual reporting effort with our reporting on the ground in Amsterdam in one story. The problem with that, as Ryan Grimm explains later on in this thread, and I explained in my article, is that it's simply not true. The article that they're referring to very much puts the emphasis on it's all just quotes of Israeli football hooligans saying, "Oh, we were attacked by anti-Semites." No evidence. No objective evidence is put forward towards it, and it really just reiterates the whole Israeli spin again. So
Asa, just to point out a couple of things, which is that the word "killed" was not our word. That was the word that Christian Tribet, the New York Times reporter, used in that email to the New York Times' Charlie Statlander. It was
100%,
Christian Tribet who said to one of his superiors, "My story was killed." That's not my spin. That's not the Electronic Intifada spin. That's the words of the New York Times reporter who was preparing this investigation to one of his managers. And so look at the dishonesty in this internal email from New York Times editor Phil Pan, which presumably the aim was to sort of tamp down the disquiet among at least some of the New York Times staff at the way the newspaper is behaving. Because even if we know that the New York Times itself is a propaganda organ, there are some reporters like Christian Triebert who are trying to do the right thing. Christian Triebert seemed genuinely to want to set the record straight. And in that email as well, Asa, correct me if I'm wrong, Christian Triebert said that he contacted fellow journalists at the New York Times who'd written one of these stories about Amsterdam and said, I wrote to them to make them aware of inaccuracies.
Yeah, absolutely. That's correct. And you're right. It was his word killed. It wasn't our word. We were just quoting what he said in the email. And yeah, it does, there was a correction. I explained in my story. There was later, a few days later, there was a correction issued to this New York Times story once they realized that a video that they claimed was of Israelis being attacked by anti-Semites was actually of Israelis attacking a Dutch person, or at least a person in Amsterdam. And so, it showed the reality of that. It seems that it was Christian Triebert who alerted them to this, and that seems to have led to the correction, although it's kind of a half-hearted correction. Maybe tomorrow, if we can skip down, we'll come back to the Andalou Agency story, but if we could skip down to the first draft. Thanks. If you go on archive.is, you can see the first draft of the New York Times, the initial New York Times report. Certainly the first draft that's still at least available. This was a breaking story, and these stories obviously develop online. This is the first one available. You can see the headline. It doesn't actually mention anti-Semitism in the headline yet, but in the sub-headline it does. And in this story, you can see if you read this version of the story, it's very, very clear that the paper had not only a pro-Israeli spin from the beginning, but they were taking their whole narrative from Israel, literally the Israeli government, specifically Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and Itamar Ben-Gvir. So there's a quote later. So it's very, very striking. There's no evidence in the story of anti-Semitism whatsoever. There's not even any claims of anti-Semitism apart from Israeli government ministers. So straight away, they're just taking the word of Israeli government ministers, the same lies they always make about anti-Semitism, and they're just making their report fit around the Israelis' claims. That's what happened. There's a couple of quotes in it that proved this. Quote, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office said on Friday that he had ordered 2 planes to be sent to the Netherlands to assist Israeli citizens. Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's national security minister, said on social media Friday that Israeli officials were working with the Dutch authorities to investigate the attacks, which he said were driven by anti-Semitism. The next one, the Dutch police said in a statement on Friday that 57 arrests were made in connection with the unrest in Amsterdam. No claim of anti-Semitism there, although the Dutch police did later follow the Israeli narrative and claim that. The statement did not mention anti-Semitism or say whether anyone was targeted in the violence. This is the initial version of the story, remember. And then again later on, Mr. Ben-Gvir, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Israeli National Security Minister, said that he was working with the Foreign Minister, Defense Ministry, etc., to rescue the Israeli citizens. Quote, this is Itamar Ben-Gvir speaking, fans who went to see a football game encountered anti-Semitism and were attacked with unimaginable cruelty just because of their Jewishness, he said. So what is very notable is in the next version of this story, a few hours later, all mention of Ben-Gvir has been taken out because, of course, as our viewers, most of our viewers, I'm sure, will know, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's police minister, is a Kahanist extremist, Jewish supremacist who he has the same beliefs as a lot of Israeli ministers, but he's very crude about expressing them. In other words, that he wants to expel all Palestinians, and he says it openly. And so in that respect, he's kind of an embarrassment on the New York Times pages, and so they removed all mention of him from the next version. But it's very, very clear the narrative the New York Times were trying to put forward was coming straight from Israel from the beginning.
And
also,
the mayor of Amsterdam also came out this week, also saying the same thing, that words were put in her mouth by Israel.
Yeah, so much more seems to keep coming out about this story, and the narrative is being rolled back very, very quickly. And this is a point Ali makes, that it's very similar to the Israeli hoax about the mass rapes that never happened on the 7th of October 2023, that the whole Western media seemed to go with, but has just been debunked. And we have there's a story here from the Anadolu agency, the Turkish news agency, and it was reported in Holland as well, that the mayor of Amsterdam, who is a Green Party, a person from the Green Party, or at least was in the past. She may be independent now, I'm not sure. She basically she went along initially with this Israeli narrative about anti-Semitic pogroms, and has now this week has recanted that. And the quote here is, "We were completely caught off guard by Israel," she told the Dutch broadcaster on Sunday. "At 3 a.m, Prime Minister Netanyahu was already giving a lecture about what happened in Amsterdam. We were still gathering all the facts." And she expressed frustration with this. She described it as propaganda. That the idea that the Israelis were targeted. She emphasized that the term pogrom, which she used in a press conference, had been manipulated to serve political agendas. Quote, "If I had known it would be weaponized in this way, I would not have used that word," she said, acknowledging her regret over the term's unintended implications. I mean, the lesson for, liberal and, allegedly progressive politicians in the West is always assume Israel's lying. Because why would you, it's like, if we take her at face value here, she will have learned a hard lesson here. But, surely you should try and find out the truth and not just believe by default that there is anti-Semitism happening. It seems to happen. Western politicians seems to be fooled by this.
I don't know if they're fooled.
So much.
Are they fooled, Asa? Because it
seems pretty willing. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's also not that, yes, there must be, and let me be clear, none of what I say is designed to absolve them or exonerate them. But I think a lot of them truly believe this. They truly believe the lies about October 7th that they spout. Perhaps Annalena Baerbock, the Green Party foreign minister of Germany, truly believes she watched a non-existent video filmed by Hamas of its own men raping Israeli women on October 7th. Maybe she really believes that. I think they are so steeped in their racist and dogmatic ideology that they're unable to exist outside of it. And as far as the New York Times is concerned, and this is true of a lot of other media, I've seen a lot of friends in the Netherlands commenting on how Dutch media played an exactly similar role in spreading this hoax. And more than that, inciting hatred and fear and violence against Dutch citizens and residents of the Netherlands of Arab, Moroccan, Palestinian background by falsely presenting them as, violent people who are running around Amsterdam looking for Jews to beat up. And as you pointed out in your story, Asa, in your write-up of this, the New York Times ran with headlines that like a global Jew hunt. That was one of their headlines. So
it's the same narrative of Geert Wilders of the far right.
Yeah.
Yes,
dressed up in New York Times.
The original Donald Trump with the crazy hair. That's important to point out, because we have all these European liberals expressing utter horror at how could Americans elect Donald Trump instead of that nice lady Kamala Harris, when they invented it. They invented Donald Trump. Jean-Marie Le Pen, Geert Wilders, all these far-right figures, and of course now Marine Le Pen, his daughter, but across Europe, who are exploiting this kind of this atrocity propaganda, bringing it home to Europe. So it's a way to say, Netanyahu's claim is always that we in Israel are. I'm not allowed to do. I shouldn't do impression, but Benjamin Netanyahu. I can do a Benjamin Netanyahu.
This Philadelphia accent.
Yeah. We are the on the forefront of Western civilization. We are fighting the barbarians here, so you don't have to fight them in the streets of America and Europe, and this allows them to extend that narrative to say, look at these savages and barbarians on the streets of Amsterdam or wherever else it might be. And also this week, the German police, the police in Berlin, put out a warning saying that LGBTQ people and Jews should be wary in Arab neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And this is absolutely disgusting, racist incitement by the German police, because those neighborhoods where people of refugees, people of a migrant background live, they are the principal victims of German state racism and societal racism. And I wrote about this a couple of years ago for the Electronic Intifada, I think in 2021. After that Israeli rampage in Gaza in May of 2021, the German police issued a report, comprehensive statistics showing that the rise in what they define as anti-Semitism, because all of these definitions shift all the time and are politicized. But the rise in anti-Semitism in Germany, they said they'd seen a surge. It almost entirely came from the far right and had absolutely nothing to do with Arabs or immigrants or Muslims. That's it. That's the story. It was actually before the May 2021 war. It was in February 2021. But this was based on German police statistics. And there's no reason to think that has changed at all. The only thing that has changed is that there is even more right-wing extremism, even more anti-Arab and anti-Muslim hatred and incitement. And this Amsterdam hoax, just like the mass rape hoax of October 7th, is about portraying Arabs and Muslims, people of color, people from Africa, anyone who's not of, what they would consider a European background, to be barbarians and animals and a threat, and to justify this hatred and violence against them.
I also take it to be, Israel's actions in the last couple of weeks, I also take it to be essentially an op against the solidarity movement in Europe, because, for more than a year, they have not been able to, Western governments have not been able to stop protesters coming out on the streets. Even in Germany, where the most extreme oppression has been going on, people are still coming out, and, activists get very dispirited. These demonstrations haven't stopped the genocide, obviously, and people sort of think it's pointless, and, maybe it is not directly stopping any war materials being shipped to Israel, as Palestine Action is doing and so forth. But I do think these things make a difference. I do think that it increases the pressure on Israel, and so there's no doubt that Israel is trying to stop these things happening. And in that regard, to me, it's very much like what the Israel lobby carried out against Jeremy Corbyn when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the opposition. They tried to stop him becoming the prime minister, and in my view, they succeeded in doing that. They were at least certainly one of the primary reasons Jeremy Corbyn didn't become the prime minister of Britain. And it's it's the same narrative as where in the mainstream media it is just one of these pro-Israel lobbyists, one of these Zionist fanatics just has to say, oh, this is anti-Semitism. Any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism. It's quite often targeted, as you're saying, Ali, against people of color, against Muslims, against Arabs in the West, and so forth. And there's this idea that they're all anti-Semites. This is something that is spread very consciously by Israel as a weapon against them and against solidarity movements, and it can be quite effective for them, has to be said.
Yeah. Well, we just have a few minutes left, but Asa, I know that you also wanted to give us an update on what's happening with Palestine Action in the UK. Can you, just kind of give us a brief overview, a thumbnail sketch of what's happening with that direct action group?
Yeah, so Palestine Action have been. It's hard to keep up with the number of actions they've been taking against Elbit Systems, the Israeli arms firm in the UK. But of course, the repression against them has escalated as well because of that, because Elbit is clearly feeling the pinch, and with the Labour government in place, which has very strong ties to pro-Israel groups, has very strong ties to the arms industry in general, there's been increased repression this week of Palestine Action. Yesterday, 10 people were arrested in a coordinated operation by counter-terrorism police. So the counter-terrorism police, a kind of semi-secretive British police force, which reports to the MI5 intelligence agency. They were the force that have been arresting over the last year and harassing Palestine solidarity activists and journalists, including myself, of course, a month ago when they raided my home and seized my devices. They've been carrying out increasing repression against Palestine solidarity activists, especially from Palestine Action, and this week they used and abused counter-terrorism powers in order to carry out smash and grab raids of Palestine Action activists, and as of that I last heard earlier today, the raids on their homes were still ongoing. They were carrying out comprehensive searches of their homes. They smashed doors in. The family members and flatmates have not been allowed to return to their homes until the raids are completed, and this is in connection with the Filton 10, who are some of Palestine Action's political prisoners, carried out a action on the 6th of August where Elbit's facility in Filton was broken into, and Israeli quadcopter drones were destroyed, and allegedly this Palestine Action caused Elbit, the Israeli arms firm, over £1 million in damages. The Filton 10 are all in prison and they're on remand. And the way that the abuse of counterterrorism laws comes in, Palestine Action is not a prescribed group, although there has been political pressure from the pro-Israel lobby for them to be prescribed as a terrorist group. But what the police have been doing, what they did with the Filton 10, is they arrest them under counter-terrorism provisions, but because this won't stick, because it's not a terrorist group, in reality, they don't get charged with terrorism. When they eventually do get charged, the ones who have been charged, they get charged with other offences, either public order offences or criminal damage, allegedly criminal damage, and some of them have been remanded in prison, which is what happened to the Filton 10. These 10 new activists yesterday, we're waiting to hear more about what will happen with them, but they're taking a similar approach with them. They're arresting them under counterterrorism powers, and we'll see if they get charged on what will happen with them. Because the counter-terror police have all these much bigger powers than the regular police have, they can hold them for extended time periods without charge. They can repeatedly interrogate them. And Palestine Action sources are telling me that some of them are on their fourth interrogation in less than 36 hours. The Elbit site in Filton was opened last year. It was opened with the UK Israeli ambassador, and Elbit's Israeli CEO came down for the opening event. So this is about solidifying ties between the Labour government and the genocidal state of Israel.
As always. Well, thanks. Definitely keep us posted on that, of course. Ali, kind of relatedly, there have been there's been an uptick in door knockings by the feds and cops here in the U.S. Give us a sense of what's been going on there and how we can protect ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, what I want to say, obviously, we spoke about this a few weeks ago. Asa's house got raided by the police, and we're seeing now the homes of Palestine Action activists. This is not new, but it's escalating, and the repression is escalating. And it's happened in Canada recently. The police in Vancouver raided the home of Charlotte Cates, an activist with the group Samidoun, which in a joint action, the Canadian and US governments defined, just arbitrarily defined as being somehow related to terrorism, which is the goal, which is to associate opposition with the genocide anywhere, whether it's Palestine Action, stopping the weapons industry, or anyone else, to redefine them as terrorism. And there was this tweet from Alison Weir, who is the founder of the group, I think it's called If Americans Knew, a longtime activist around Palestine, who revealed just the other day that FBI agents suddenly showed up at my home recently. They asked me about a person whose name I didn't recognize. I asked to have a family member present and ascertained from the agents that one of their officers had asked them to check in with certain people in regard to something to do with Press TV. Press TV, of course, is an Iranian network which broadcasts to the world in English. And as Alison Weir says, she's given interviews to Press TV and has said that, and that, I take it from her tweet, is the extent of her involvement. But we saw something similar with Scott Ritter, who is a well-known commentator whose home was raided by the FBI a few months ago. And according to his account, they were asking him questions about his relationship with the Russian network RT. So it may be, I'm just speculating here, but if there's any pattern that they're trying to associate, to say that people who associate with these foreign state media are somehow agents of those states or whatever it is that they can use to try to have a pretext to intimidate them with these sorts of raids or harassment or whatever it is. But I think that we have to remember, we have to remind ourselves constantly, because it's easy to become intimidated, it's easy to start self-censoring, that we have rights. Here in the United States, we have the First Amendment, and it guarantees our right to criticize the government, to speak freely about the issues we talk about on this program, to stand up for the things that we believe in. And I think it's really important at these times when we see this escalating repression to make sure that we all know our rights. And in the United States, and I believe this is true in Canada and in Britain, although the local laws will vary and you should know what they are, but in the United States, you never have to talk to the police. Never. There are very limited circumstances that you do. For example, if you're driving a car and they pull you over, you do have to identify yourself. So there are very limited circumstances. But if the police or the FBI come to your door and say, we want to talk to you, you do not have to talk to them. You can say, I don't want to talk to you, and close the door. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can just say, I don't want to talk to you now, but if you give me your name and number, I'll have a lawyer call you. Yeah. I'd like to talk to a lawyer first. You can always do that. And the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, publishes very simple, straightforward, know your rights guides. We can show one from the ACLU. I think it's the ACLU of Southern California. And it just tells you in very simple language what your rights are. And I think people need to know their rights. It's very intimidating if the police or the FBI come to your door, and it's intended to be. But you can just say, I don't want to talk to you. So if you just Google ACLU, know your rights, this or a similar page from one of the other ACLU chapters in another state will come up. There are similar groups in Britain, in the UK, and other countries where people are watching. I don't want to talk about countries where I don't know what all the legal system is, but I can say in the United States, in the UK, unless they, this tells you if they have a warrant, it's a different situation. But even if they have a warrant, even if they arrest you for any reason, you don't have to talk to them. Remember that. They will tell you, they'll read you your Miranda rights that say, you do not have to say anything, but anything you say can and will be used in evidence against you. So why would you say anything if it's going to be used in evidence against you? So know your constitutional rights, know your legal rights, and exercise them.
And I know that specifically for Palestine solidarity activists and students, Palestine Legal at palestinelegal.org also has some good Know Your Rights pamphlets, easily downloadable, shareable. Back earlier this year, I cannot recall exactly when, but you can find it on our podcast feed. I interviewed Radhika Sainath of
and the
Palestine
ADC
Legal.
as well.
And the ADC, absolutely.
The American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, and I think we had
we had
Ayub. I'm sorry,
Abed Ayub.
Abed Ayub,
yeah.
yes.
Exactly.
The director of of ADC, the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. That's another very good group.
Yeah.
Go to their website, adc.org, because they also have resources in, know your rights guides, but also if you face any kind of civil rights violation or discrimination, not just by the government, but by a company or a school district, or whatever it is, you should report it to them because,
absolutely.
This is unfortunately the reality we live in. And we want people to know their rights, to exercise them, and to understand that as long as we are standing together and supporting each other as this repression deepens, that we're the stronger for it. And we will stand up to it.
Yeah.
In mainland Europe and Britain, now, the closest equivalent to Palestine Legal is the European Legal Support Centre, which viewers can find at elsc.support. That's the website, elsc.support. Just a quick word on British law. We don't have the First Amendment to protect us, unfortunately. We free speech protections are much weaker here. But we still, for now, we still have the right to silence. If police come to your home, they still need a warrant. When the police came to my home, they had a warrant. They need a warrant to search your home. You have the right to silence. You don't have to speak to them. I saw one person say the opposite in the comments. That's not correct. In Britain, you have the right to not speak to the police, and you shouldn't speak to the police. You can say no comment. You should certainly have a lawyer. You should at least get legal advice before you speak to police. There is an exception, and this is probably what the commentator is referring to, when you're crossing the British border. If you're coming into Britain or leaving Britain and you are stopped on the border, if they invoke the appropriate schedule of the counter-terror law, you no longer have the right to silence, and you're supposed to speak to them. Unfortunately, this is an incredibly unjust law which has been on the British books for decades, actually.
But you still have the right, even in those circumstances with those Terrorism Act interrogations at the border, you still have the right to ask to speak to a lawyer before you speak to them. So in all circumstances where you have these interactions, the first thing you should say is, I want to talk to a lawyer.
Yeah, and you don't have to answer the questions in the way that they want you to answer them, right? You could just speak at length and boringly.
That's right.
In general, the smart thing, any lawyer will tell you, you be polite, be respectful, but exercise your rights. You don't have to speak, and you should not speak, and you should talk to a lawyer. And that's not because we, are saying, oh, people should get up to things and then hide them. No, that these are your rights, and they're there to protect you. And these rights won't protect you unless you exercise them. And that's what we're saying. Know your rights and exercise them.
There you go. Well, thank you for that reminder, Ali. And let's wrap. Let's take a look at the website quickly before we go. Again, just incredible amounts of really beautifully written features from our contributors in Gaza. We also have, as always, analysis and news reports by our staff writers. Ali, did you want to say anything about specific stories, and also as we enter fundraising season?
Yeah, we have so many incredible stories. Of course, we talked about Abubaker Abed's story, Palestinian Courage Inspires Me Beyond Belief, in which he interviewed Ipswich Town Premier League footballer Sam Morsi, which is wonderful. We have that beautiful feature you read some of earlier on, Cultivating Hope in a Sea of Desolation by Raja Salah, and one piece by Fida al-Qidra that really stuck with me, where she talked to a Palestinian surgeon, Dr. Khalid al-Sir, who survived the Sidi Timan torture camp, concentration camp, and who bears witness to the horrors that he experienced and that he witnessed there. And it's a really incredible piece of journalism. And also, if we look at the blog post column, we have a lot of writing by our own colleagues at the Electronic Intifada, including the post there, Day 404, Palestine Wins, We All Win, by Maureen Murphy. And that's a write-up of last week's live stream, including that fantastic, informative interview with 𝐄𝐥𝐿 𝐄𝐥𝐿, which you'll also find on our YouTube channel. So if you didn't watch that interview with 𝐄𝐥𝐿, it was really incredible. And I just want to say, because I didn't say this last week, I wanted to thank Maureen, because she did a lot of the research and preparation that helped make that interview so informative. So thank you for that, Maureen.
Always. Thank you, Maureen.
And and then just as you said, it's November, December is the time where many organizations like ours raise a lot of the funds they need for the upcoming year. And that's the case with us too. So you're going to hear a bit more about that than over the next few weeks than we usually like to do, because we like to spend all our time doing the work. But all the work you see on the website, these fantastic features by our writers in Gaza, this great analysis by our colleagues and other writers and contributors, is paid for by the support we get from viewers and listeners and readers like you. Everything you see on this live stream, the incredible analysis that Jon does week in, week out, the investigations Asa does, the news briefs Nora brings us, all of this work is done thanks to you. And even while we've been live over the past couple of hours, we've had viewers giving donations by going to the website and clicking on Donate Now in the top right corner. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, in the description for the video, you can find links to our fundraising pages with different payment options that work, for different people around the world. And there are people who make donations from, I think, almost every country in the world. So we're very grateful for that. We love doing this work. We feel it's a privilege and a responsibility to do it. And the reason we're able to do it independently without fear or favor, and to stand up to the New York Times and expose their lies and propaganda, and to expose all the powers that be that are silencing the truth, is because we are community-funded media, independent media, and that's how we do it. So just to say thank you to everybody who's already contributed, especially to people who make a monthly donation, which you can set up at those links I mentioned. That's a way to sustain us throughout the year. And so we're very grateful to everyone who gives. And the thing I always want to say is that we want people to give who can. If giving to us is going to really stretch your budget in a way that you're going to go without something you need, or it's going to put your family in a difficult position, please do not donate to us. Give to us in other ways by sharing our articles. We want everyone to do that. Sharing our articles, just telling people about the work we do, spreading the word. That's just as important. It's very important. So thank you to everyone. And we will continue doing this. We're not going anywhere.
Exactly. Thanks, Ali. And as always, thank you to Tamara Nassar for production and direction of this live stream, Eli Gerzon for social media, Maureen Claire Murphy, of course, our senior editor for writing and pre-production, Michael Brown fact-checking, everyone at the Electronic Intifada, all of you, Asa, John, Ali, and everyone else in the EI sphere. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next week.